Perfect. Thank you.
One minute.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
And we're back, coming to you live from across the divided states of America, the most disruptive show in American politics, in the politically independent corner. I am your fact machine from the year 3030, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, ever vigilant, the last with a burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together, as we always do, we are bringing you the news, Fault Lines, with Thomas and Stranahan. And let's get into it. We're going into headlines first. By the way, we do these 3 times every morning, once again in an hour, and once again an hour after that. That's at 7, 8, and 9 a.m. Eastern, or 4, 5, and 6 a.m. Pacific. After this first round of headlines, we're going into Jamarl's monologue. And after that, we're taking calls. You can call in anytime you want to, though. We just might not get to you. But our number is 202-521-1320. Without further ado, let's get into headlines. First up, during an ABC News town hall in Pennsylvania, President Trump on Tuesday claimed that he, quote, upplayed, end quote, the severity of the coronavirus pandemic. This comes despite telling Bob Woodward in March that he, quote, wanted to always play it down, end quote. This comes as Biden visited Florida for the first time since winning the primary, saying that Trump has, quote, done nothing but assault the dignity of Hispanic families over and over and over and over again, end quote. Back and forth there. I will note, I see Trump on video. I'm not going to make too much out of this. I see Trump on video in this ABC News town hall. I do not see Biden on video for this Florida speech anywhere. Trump is definitely, as he would be, much more in the public's eye in this moment. You know, Biden is no longer stuck in his basement as he was, if I remember correctly, a month ago. But he's come out of the basement, thankfully. But he's still not seeing as much light as, you know, some people would hope he would. He's getting up there in age. Anyway, in our next headline, Nancy Pelosi and other members of Congress are calling for an investigation into an ICE detention center in Georgia, which has been accused of denying some much-needed medical care and apparently forced unnecessary hysterectomies from an outside doctor. Talked about this yesterday. In our next headline, TikTok's parent company ByteDance has said that it plans to retain a majority stake in the U.S. version of the app. That's TikTok. That Oracle, the company Oracle, will most likely be operating. This comes after Microsoft dropped out of the race. It also comes amid widespread confusion about the fate of the app. There have been 3 deadlines so far given by the Trump administration for when TikTok is supposed to sort of cease operations under Chinese rules, so to speak, in the U.S. Once was September 15th. Once was September 20th. Obviously, September 15th is past. September 20th is coming up. And then the other is early November. We'll see which of those actually pans out. Sort of stages of expectation there. That curious to see how it all happens. Anyway, in Europe, the European Commission president has called for a Green New Deal and recovery package to recover from the pandemic. She also said that, quote, vaccine nationalism threatens lives, referencing individual countries' attempts to attain and distribute the vaccine outside of the guidance of a larger authority. Back in the States, in California, more than 3.3 million square miles of California's land have burnt this year. That's more than 27 times as much as was burned last year. The Mount Wilson Observatory in the hills north of Los Angeles is now in threat from California's fires, specifically from the Bobcat fire, which started in Azusa 10 days ago on the 6th of September. It's now within 500 feet of the observatory as it's burnt more than 40,000 acres and engaged the efforts of more than 1,000 firefighters. Senator Kamala Harris, of course, the vice presidential candidate for the Democratic Party, visited the town of Aubrey, California. That's near the burn from the Creek fire. She spoke alongside California emergency officials there, as well as the state's governor, Gavin Newsom. While there, she criticized, quote, the Trump administration, saying, quote, the fact is that we are in the midst of an incredible crisis because our climate is changing in drastic form, which is leading to California burning in many places, which is leading to storms hitting our Gulf Coast repeatedly year after year and getting worse, end quote. This comes, heard similar remarks from Biden. This is what happens. Yes, climate change, but Biden was the VP under Obama, isn't it? I mean, Jamarl, you would know this. I've seen you and Margaret Kimberly actually posting about this recently, both of you. Frequent guest of the show, Margaret Kimberly. Barack Obama, under the administration within which Biden was the VP, Barack Obama ramped up more oil production than any other president before him. Isn't that right?
Yeah, God of oil, Obama. He brags about it. He would even say, the gas prices or the amount of gas that we produced in this country from fracking and all this other stuff. Yeah, he brags about it. Oh, wait. He doesn't brag about it when he's going after Trump. He doesn't brag about it then. He brags about it beforehand when people are taking credit for the amount of oil that we're producing.
He brags about it in front of the people who benefit from the production of that oil, basically, in some sense. Anyway, I just want to highlight that. I don't want to make too much of it. Of course, everybody in some sense has their hands dirty with oil, so to speak, once you get up to that high level. Anyway, in our next headline, Hurricane Sally has increased in strength to a Category 2 hurricane. This comes as it hit the coast of Alabama this morning at 5:45 a.m. Eastern, not too long ago, I'll note. And according to the National Hurricane Center, it is going to cause historic and catastrophic flooding in parts of northwest Florida and southern Alabama. You should also be watching out for Hurricane Teddy, which is currently tracking near the Virgin Islands and is expected to become a major storm by the weekend. Palestinian forces exchanged fire with Israeli government forces just hours after the signing of a peace deal between Israel and the UAE and Bahrain in Washington. Trump called that peace deal, quote, the dawn of a new Middle East, end quote. That peace deal only briefly mentions Palestinians, calling for a, quote, just, comprehensive, and enduring resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, end quote. These are the first new agreements in 26 years between Israel and an Arab state. That was the signing of an agreement in 1994 between Israel and Jordan. So it has been a while. This is a diplomatic coup for the Trump administration. It's just, we can get into the specifics on the other side of your monologue, probably. It's just what that actually means. We can maybe segue back into it with the Nobel Peace Prize thing. Anyway, we can talk more about that later. You're listening to Fault Lines. Those are our headlines. Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. So, Jamarl, what's on your mind today?
So, I went back and forth, but I think I'm going to land on Donald Trump and the ABC News interview or town hall. Now, the thing is, it's not so much the entirety of the town hall, and you can find all sorts of clips to play with Trump and saying this or saying that. But I'm more interested in one of the people who asked Trump a question, context, and why she asked the question is the thing that's fascinating to me. So you can't see her on the radio unless you have some other abilities that I'm unaware of. But this is an African American woman asking Donald Trump a very specific question about the COVID response and why he was so lax in actually going out and doing something about it. Why did you downplay the response? Let's play the clip. But listen to the way she asks.
If you believe it's the president's responsibility to protect America, why would you downplay a pandemic that is known to disproportionately harm low-income families and minority communities?
Yeah. Well, I didn't downplay it. I actually, in many ways, I upplayed it in terms of action. My action was very strong. Yeah, because what I did was with China, I put a ban on. With Europe, I put a ban on. And we would have lost thousands of more people had I not put the ban on. So that was called action, not with the mouth, but in actual fact. We did a very, very good job when we put that ban on. Whether you call it talent or luck, it was very important. So we saved a lot of lives when we did that.
There were holes in the ban, and the European ban didn't come for another month.
Well, they were Americans. I mean, the holes in were if you have somebody in China that's an American citizen, we had to let them in.
Now, there are nearly 200,000 people dead. This is patently ridiculous. And Donald Trump, on tape, did say he downplayed it. He did understand that it was worse than the flu. He did understand it was deadly. And if you've paid attention to me, my channel, I've made the point for months now that we, the United States, big contributor to the World Health Organization, had people in that organization to get across how bad and how deadly that virus was. Donald Trump is full of it. But her question was interesting to me because she said and made a distinction. You're supposed to protect America. Point A. Point B, African Americans were disproportionately affected, meaning she's connecting the two together. We are part of this America that you were supposed to protect. Why didn't you do that? Donald Trump ignores that part and goes into this other nonsense about China and everything else. My point is, the way she asked this question, I love the way she asked this question. But this is almost a cry for help, right? Whatever you think of the United States, and people have all sorts of ideas in their heads, exceptional nation, this or that, whatever you think of it, I think it's fair to say that an experiential test of your competence and your ability to do things is the way that reality presents. You have fires that are eating up your West Coast. At one point, you had tornado fires. And there's the iconic picture of a sign that has warning COVID with a fire in the background, tearing everything up in the background. You have flooding right now, meaning Donald Trump may also end up with his own Katrina if we are not necessarily careful or if that tornado gets worse. Not to mention the 30 million people without a job, the 40 million people without health care, the pandemic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm making the point that your country is being hit with all sorts of catastrophes. And your ability, your competence is in how you deal with those, not in the political dramas. She asked Donald Trump something very specific and something that was pertinent to her community. And the sad part about it is she could ask Joe Biden the same question. And Joe Biden would give her a very nice speech. He would give her very pleasant words. And Joe Biden would go about his own business, forgetting the very thing that he told her. She has nowhere to go. She has nowhere to go. Like, yeah, you may be chastising Donald Trump about this, but at the end of the day, what you want in your political space, because it's not found in Trump, it's also not found in Biden. And that is the saddest point to make about our political spectrum, especially from the standpoint of African Americans. She has no other options. And because she has no other options, the political things that she wants are also not found in the party that is going to get 90-something% support. You have nowhere else to go. Now, the catch becomes, is that true? You would have all sorts of people who would say, that's true. You have nowhere else to go. You got to vote for Joe Biden. You got to vote for Joe Biden. Donald Trump is a maniac. Clearly, Donald Trump doesn't care about this or that. Joe Biden doesn't either. He doesn't have to. You're irrelevant to him. You're irrelevant to him for the very specific point that people tell you you have nowhere else to go. If you are talking about any notion of black power, it will not be found in the Democratic Party. Let me repeat that. Yes, I understand that her asking Donald Trump that question, she was massively unsatisfied with the answer, and no, she will not find what she needs out of a Trump administration. I am making the point that you will also not find what you need out of a Biden administration. There is no political solution to this problem right now as long as people, African Americans in particular, are willing to acquiesce to this notion of having nowhere else to go. You are basically in the same boat as lefties, the Bernie-crats, the people who they say you have nowhere else to go, sit in the corner. I call them political equivalent of battered wives. These are the people who Joe Biden can pee in their cereal and they would still go out and vociferously vote for Joe Biden entirely because they're terrified of Trump. Now, where's your leverage in that situation? Whatever you find yourself, meaning black, lefty, Hispanic, whatever. I think these things are more important than class lines, but fair enough. Where is your political leverage in that? It's not there. Whatever you want to tell yourself, whatever you want to try to, wrap in your head, it's not there. Your political leverage is found in accountability, the ability to leave, the ability to say, these are the policies we want. You represent our interests, you get our vote. And until then, no. It's not so much that you're voting for Trump. It's not so much that you're pushing for Trump. It's more so that you have enough integrity in yourself to hold your particular candidate accountable. Well, that candidate can't necessarily blow you off. Healthcare is basically her point. Medicare for all, 88% Democratic support, 70% public support. And they tell you to kick rocks. And you look at me and say, we have some leverage. You don't. Stop. Your leverage is walking. If the Democratic Party would like to tank the world to a man they're calling a maniac, that is on the Democratic Party. It is their job to get your vote, not the other way around. And until you realize that, and until you function from that level of, yeah, it's your job to get my vote, not the other way around. It's not for me to give it. It's not perfunctory. It's a transaction that's taking place between the things that we want and need versus what you're supposed to implement. Until you get there, this level of powerlessness will continue. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not so distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history, this week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back, and apparently you're listening to us. Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. We are taking calls. If you want to not just be listening, but potentially speaking with us, we'd like that. It'd be good to hear from you. It's been a while. Our number is 202-521-1320. It's actually 10 numbers. I'm going to stop making that semi-joke now. But yeah, 202-521-1320 is the number to call. Jamarl, one quick thing. Have you ever heard of this guy named Albert Otto Hirschman or Albert Hirschman? Does that name sound familiar?
Sounds familiar, but it's not ringing a bell.
So it's been a while since I've read him. He's an author. He was like this sort of, I think of him as a sociologist and economist, but kind of an interesting figure. He has a couple of books. I remember reading Exit, Voice, and Loyalty and the Rhetoric of Reaction. And he also has this thing called the Hiding Hand Principle. Anyway, interesting thinker. I'd recommend checking him out in general. I brought him up for the Exit, Voice, and Loyalty thing. You're talking about the Democratic Party. You're talking about voters being stuck with the Democratic Party. Now, the Exit, Voice, and Loyalty is this book. I think fits the DNC pretty well. He's saying there are three responses you can take, basically. There is exit, you leave the organization. There is voice, you attempt to change the organization. And then there's loyalty, where you effectively, try to continue to ally yourself with that organization in its current form without really trying to change it. Those are functionally, it's in this simplest sense, those are the three responses that you can have. And I think for more people, it would be wise to think, what is the correct response in an almost game theoretic sense right now to the decline of the DNC? Because for some people, and this is the thing with information in these kinds of information games, for some people, based on the information they have, it makes more sense to them to stay loyal than to either exit or do voice. Now, to you, it doesn't. And I think the critical piece there is, what information do you see? What perspective do you have that you think maybe they don't, or vice versa, too?
It's been 40 years.
There might be something that you're not seeing.
It's been 40 years. And it's like this tactic of basically staying, think about what has taken place. Your country has basically slid further and further to the right. And I'm saying this from the standpoint of a corporate money interest perspective. And you have policy now where the overwhelming majority of the party clearly supports. And the party tells those people to go kick rocks. Because what the party understands now is what they understood a while ago. When Bill Clinton told Jesse Jackson, you have nowhere else to go, or Joe Biden says, vote for the other guy, he understands what that means. That basically, because Democrats have slid so far to the right, Republicans have done so also. It wasn't like these guys just shook hands. Obama would tell you, in the 90s, I would have been a Republican. Yeah. So it's not, this is one of those things where, based on generational stuff, you get a shift that the public doesn't even recognize is taking place until you finally stand there and you look back and like, whoa, you mean Republicans were for the New Deal at one point? Yes, Republicans were for the New Deal at one point. You mean Democrats held control of the House of Representatives for like 50 years? Yes, they held control for like 50 years. They gave it up when Bill Clinton got in office and started passing all those right-wing policies. What I'm saying is, it is impossible for the Democratic Party to function if tens of millions of people leave. And the question at that point is on them. They say power concedes nothing without a demand. Fine. What's your demand? We want Medicare for all. Make it specific. Make it very specific. If they decide to end the world by jumping off a cliff with Donald Trump because they don't want to acquiesce to policy that the public is screaming for, and not just screaming for, shouldn't even have to make the argument for. We're in the middle of a pandemic. And if you look back at what FDR did compared to now, it is abominable of what they're doing. And so what I'm seeing is, it is impossible for that party to function with 40 million people leaving the party, or 20 million people leaving the party. And the party has a question that it has to answer. Are we willing to take it to Trump, or are we going to acquiesce to policy that the public demands? Now, this is not an easy question for a party, by the way, because for them, losing to Trump is intellectual. It doesn't hurt them in the way that it hurts the poor and the marginalized and everything else. But it's also this notion of, do we allow the public to have this level of uppityness to give us demands, in which case we need to respond to? And they could come away with it and says, yeah, we don't want to acquiesce to that principle at all. We don't want to give a precedent where we as a political party gave way and gave deference to what the public wanted at any particular point in time. Yeah, we're taking to Trump. They could say that. But the point is, your public needs to at some point be able to do that. Otherwise, you're not issuing a demand. I'm always shocked that the left would love unions. Yeah, we love those unions. Yeah, we should have strikes. And yet they would turn around and say, but we must love and hug the party that beats us and slaps us. That's what I see. It's maybe a strategic thing from the standpoint of policy or strategy in regards to getting something accomplished. But acquiescing and sitting just seems a pointless endeavor in contrast to the world to which we're being availed by. Am I wrong on that? I mean, what am I missing?
I'll put it like this. Is it more pointless, or does it seem more pointless or less pointless now than it does 30 years ago? Is it like, one way of looking at this, I'll put it like this. One way of looking at this is that you've gotten more evidence over time. Like, the system has gotten worse, or at least the DNC has gotten more and more disconnected. It's grown less connected over time with the interests of maybe the average Democrat voter. I think that's at core the argument you're making. And one way of looking at this is that as time has worn on, you have seen evidence that it's not going to change. It's been decades now. And so in that sense, it's like, okay, looking at it in a sort of simple option tree sense, the thing that you had been doing wasn't working. And therefore, it's time to try something else. Now, the question there is what else there is. I guess here's what I'm responding to, though, fundamentally, is like, what is the crux? Because I guess there's not just one, but what are the cruxes? What are the fundamental like hinges of debate here that we can get down to? I think for a lot of people, it's strategy. It is, and we were kind of talking about this both on the air and off the air yesterday, but it's this idea of what is the actual functional alternative. Like if there were leaders within the DNC who had a strong chance from the outside, Bernie seemed to maybe, but as 2016 proved, and of course as 2020 proved again, he couldn't make that change. If there were leaders inside the DNC who could make the change, I could see a lot of people who we've had on the show who are biting their tongue and voting for Biden, switching to that. Or if there were leaders outside the DNC, if there were leaders on the left, on the progressive left, I mean, you were talking from the People's Party convention, but that seems like more of a convention to shift the Overton window. They're not trying to build up, as far as I can tell, especially during this election cycle. They're not going to, or next one, frankly, to be blunt, they're probably not going to edge out the Democratic Party. So my point is, if there were a functional alternative outside of the DNC, or there were a functional reformer within the DNC, I think a lot more people would be jumping ship. I think it comes down to that kind of brass tacks tactical analysis of the situation.
I agree with you.
What's your take, Jamarl? We've got a caller too.
We do, but I agree with you. But what those people don't realize is they are their own saviors. Like, this is not something that requires a little strong man to come up and say, let's do X or let's do Y. Those people who were out there pushing for Sanders or whatever, they are their own leaders. They themselves could abdicate and pull themselves abscond from getting hit by the Democratic Party and leave. I'm not saying that they need to be under this orderly banner. I would love it if they were. But I'm just saying it needs to happen. And whatever that fear of God that needs to be put into that particular party, which Sanders represented for a moment, by the way. I mean, when they thought, oh, God, he's going to run away with it, they were terrified. Why do you think they're going out trying to give these Republicans? Just in case lefties listen to me and do exactly what I say and leave, they want to be able to have a poncho of Republicans. Well, that's only going to be 4%, so they're not going to get that poncho of Republicans. But, yeah, I understand you, though, Shane. They're looking for something that gives them some kind of way out. Let's go to Tarif. Tarif in New Orleans. Let's go to calls,
if you're down. Yeah, we've got Tarif calling in from New Orleans.
How's it going, Tarif? What's the weather like there?
Too, Jamarl.
Yeah, it's windy. The hurricane is to the east of us, going to hit Florida, Alabama. It's like, I want to have two comments and one question. First comment: thank God, Snowden brought up Julian Assange with his interview with Joe Rogan yesterday. Thank God that he brought it up. They talked about Julian Assange for like 10 minutes. And that's good because Joe Rogan audience is very huge. He get hundreds of millions of views a month. So that's good. The second comment is dealing with the virologists, Chinese virologists. I support whistleblowers because I'm a whistleblower, but at the same time, we got to be helpful. She works with Steve Bannon and a Chinese billionaire. And we all know about Steve Bannon, how the way he viewed China, him and the Chinese billionaire. And if she's telling the truth, I don't know. I mean, she got to have proof. I don't know. I don't think China would sabotage itself in the world just to get rid of the U.S. That's kind of some James Bond type of stuff, like a movie script.
No. I think you're talking about Guo Wengui. I think you're talking about. I'm probably botching the pronunciation there, but this is a guy who's been friends with him for a while. If you remember when Steve Bannon got arrested, he was arrested while he was on board the yacht of this guy. The thing with this businessman, again, Guo Wengui, Guowengui, you can do the search yourself, of course, just to check him out. Anybody listening? The thing with him is he's a dissident. He's anti-Chinese himself in terms of being opposed to the Chinese government. So it's in that sense, it's not surprising. It's not like China backed an anti-China candidate, and Steve Bannon is somehow fit himself into that glove and is willingly deceiving the world along with China to support China's interest. No, that wouldn't work. That would be a very interesting reality to live in, but no. Anywho.
No, so I'm saying it's almost like they're following a Kissinger-Brzezinski type of view on China and Russia to push them together to make them fight each other. And it's just another add to the story about trying to destroy China because it's a growing power. We all see that with the Belt and Road Initiative. So I don't really, I can't say, I don't believe the story, you know. In my last comment, this is the question. It seems like Harris is trying to take lead from Joe Biden when she tripped up and said, the Harris administration. I think that was done purposely. And I also think that, can they switch? Can she become president and then Biden become vice president?
Well, Biden can drop dead. He can do that.
That's the assumption.
Yeah. And I got to be honest. I have to be honest.
I'm
almost inclined to believe that's not the plan. That's not what I'm saying. But those people who wanted Kamala Harris in that position beforehand, were they going to get their wish? Because Joe Biden is not the same man that he was even a year ago. And if you are raw in your political calculation, you may make this calculus that Joe Biden is not going to make it his full term. So yes.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think for a lot of people who are looking at Biden, he has like a rail-thin ability to steer his own decision-making at this point. He's getting up there in the years. He probably, just the assumption here is that the assumption before Harris was chosen as his VP, at least my assumption was that his various advisors, the secretaries of state and of defense and et cetera, were going to be the real decision makers there, along with, the investor class, et cetera. Harris, I'm sure, is going to be one of many voices, but of course she's backed up by her own. I think she is going to be the real power behind the throne in that sense, but there are powers behind her throne too. And yeah, Biden is just old enough, sadly, that I don't think he's going to be making. He's not willful enough, and he's old enough in the actual real sense in which people use the word old. He has sort of. He should be able. Here's the sad thing, is that for all that he probably deserves to be in a cage somewhere, if you're older, there's this hope that you can get to some point where you can enjoy the fruits of your life. Instead, the people around him, at least this is how I see it, are kind of abusing him and using him. Anyway, we've got to go into a break. Thank you for the call, Tarif. Robert, please call back in again at 8:15. We'll be taking calls in about 45 minutes. We'll be back in a minute with Dr. Mikhail Kogan. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan.
Fault Lines.
You're listening.
From the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today. Get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the critical hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the critical hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. And for this segment and the next, Dr. Mikhail Kogan, talking about COVID and other stuff. Dr. Kogan is the medical director at the George Washington Center for Integrative Medicine. He's also the associate professor of medicine, at George Washington University. And he is the founder and executive director of the AIM Health Institute. I've got to say, Dr. Kogan, we've had you on a few times. That is a good organization name for some reason. It rolls off the tongue. The AIM Health Institute, a Washington, D.C.-based nonprofit delivering integrative services to the underserved. Again, more delightful alliteration there. Dr. Kogan, thank you for being with us. How are you doing this morning?
Pretty good. Thank you. Always glad to wake up early to join you guys.
I'm glad you're willing to. Yeah, the show is made better by your presence. Thank you for being with us. All right. Talking first about vaccinations. And actually, I'm going to tie this into a headline, and then we can segue into the full conversation. One of the headlines this morning, European Commission President pushing for and pushing against some things. And one of the things that she was pushing against was what she called vaccine nationalism. That is a quote. And this is a phrase that I hadn't heard of, honestly. Or if I had it, it hadn't stood out to me. I was looking around, and apparently this goes months back. And this has to do with the idea that different countries, including the United States, are prioritizing, getting their own vaccine pipeline set up, doing their own R&D in some cases, but whether or not they're doing that, getting their own sort of distribution, imports of vaccines in place. This would disrupt, however, global efforts to sort of distribute vaccines based on the need basis in terms of the medical profession, vaccinating people first who are going to be most exposed. That seems to be the crux of at least one of the main issues here. But could we get into that? Could we maybe start with that? We're a political show. We don't need to talk about the politics of this, but just from the sort of global vaccine supply from that perspective, in terms of who needs what, I'm curious what your take is on that issue, Dr. Kogan.
Yeah, well, I think it's a global issue. I think, of course, political issue, and of course, it's a financial issue. I mean, it's a large sum of money here at stake, and it's obvious for everybody. I think as you know, that from the beginning, there's been multiple, it's probably over 100 different vaccines. So, sort of like a run to the top, so to speak. Everybody competing, and it's not surprising. Actually, the term is new to me. I have not heard it put that way, but I'm not surprised. I think the Chinese, who probably were claiming that they were first to start developing and first to get close to approval, and then, of course, you've heard Sputnik 5, the Russian vaccine, and AstraZeneca, which is the British, although was supposed to be a worldwide. Of course, now AstraZeneca is in jeopardy, and it's not even clear what the future of that vaccine is. I'm sure we'll talk about that in a second. I hope that, despite this term being up there now, and despite, I'm sure you're correct to identify there's going to be politicians using the vaccine as a tool, I hope it's not going to turn to that, because it's really sad. We have a obvious worldwide emergency. I mean, after all, we're closing to 1 million deaths pretty soon. So,
but Dr. Kogan, This is normal, though, right? I mean, there's nothing abnormal about. Let me just say it this way: I'm always shocked that people look at our system and they see a vagary of it, and they're like, "Oh God, that's horrible," missing the point that that's the normal operation of the system itself. Meaning, this nationalism with the idea of the medication itself, we operate as a basis of operation. I got mine, screw you. Meaning this kind of individualistic system, this rah-rah, the individual, the person who can compete is the person who should get it all. And in our case, it would be abnormal for us to take a position where we're giving the vaccine out. Meaning Donald Trump saying, yeah, we're going to try to cobble as much as the vaccine as possible, especially if we can get some kind of thing where we can make a ton of profit off of it, is the normal course of operation. The guy who's not out there, who's sleeping on the street, he doesn't want to be sleeping on the street. He's out there on the street, couldn't compete. The guy who couldn't get their food is standing in a food bank for 3 hours. He doesn't want to be there.
I mean, the question is this normal? It's one question, but is this operation as usual? Sure. I mean, the medicine is industrial complex. Let's just accept it. In America, at least. I mean, medicine is first business, and then it's the public good. And there's never been otherwise in this country. I mean, it's maybe 100 years ago, but in other countries that's not the case. The countries that have it as a single payer system or some kind of a completely socialized system, that's not the case. And in those countries, the priorities are different. Because their priorities actually not just necessarily say, oh, we have to make the money out of this. No, their priorities, how do we make this cost effective and don't make the system bankrupt? and it creeps in here too, for sure, in terms of finances. And, you've seen what happened with some of the early treatments. We've talked about this early on, that vitamin C, especially at high dose intravenous, was a possible treatment. And guess what? Of course, you never seen it after. Why? Because it doesn't cost any money and nobody makes it. And so, expensive drugs went up and got the approval, again, for the same reason like everything else.
Well, wait, real quick. I'm sorry to interrupt, but the vitamin C thing, there is a difference between what doctors would want in the interest of their patients versus what drug companies would want in the interest of their patients. Is it just a situation where the doctors themselves don't have the megaphone to say, hey, the vitamin C and the vitamin D thing actually did work? Or is it just that the studies are being performed by people who basically are looking for ways to make a profit?
That's exactly right. And I mean, I don't know if I told you this, but, I put a large grant for $10 million to BARDA, and we'd never got funded. And their reasoning was this: you're lacking some in vitro data. And then it's in exactly the same time that several other, I'm not going to name them, but several drugs trials got funded with no in vitro data. And when we asked them what's going on, nobody responded. So, there is definitely a selection going on, because they know that, for expensive drug to be approved, everybody's going to look good, right? But if they approve vitamin C, then the pharma going to look at them and say, wait a second, well, what's going on? We're getting not a single dollar out of this. How can you do this? So there's a very close whole country kind of political and economical relationship. Now, you can argue whether that's right or wrong. It does move innovation, and it moves it really well. Because when you have this drive, there is a drive, yeah.
Dr. Kogan, didn't mean to interrupt. Thank you again for joining us. On this topic, on the topic of specifically drug pricing, Trump recently reaffirmed an executive order trying to price match drugs from other developed nations, reducing the sometimes astronomical prices on pharmaceutical drugs in the U.S. That, my guess going into this is that is not going to be enough. Just right off the bat, I'll just put my biases on the table or whatever. It's maybe a step in the right direction, some would say, but that's not going to be enough. I'm curious, from your perspective, what would be enough? What would be the correct sort of restorative measures, either politically, in terms of actually Congress, or just looking at it from the institution, from inside of the medical establishment? What do you think? What kinds of things do you think would be most effective at making the changes that need to be made, Dr. Kogan?
Well, you asked the $1 million question. I'm going to have to give you $1 million answer, or I guess $1 billion here in this case. I think the single payer is the only thing that can, at least theoretically, dramatically improve the healthcare in this country. No matter who says what, that's my personal belief. It appears that at least Kamala Harris agrees with me, and I'm sure there are lots of other people. And the reason I'm saying this is not because I try to stay out of politics, but because I have studied a variety of different angles here. And the reason single payer appears to be probably the only effective long-term system, it's just an incentive alignment, to be honest with you. Because in any other situation, when you have intermediaries in the system that are profiting from having complexity, it's always going to be this way. So, we're always going to be talking about, we're going to try to downplay, we're going to try to downregulate cost of drugs and this and that. We're going to buy them from outside. These measures will never be enough, because at the end of the day, the price is going to keep going up. Why? Because you don't have an effective centralized system to control it.
So wait, Dr. Kogan, I just want to sort of freeze frame on this point specifically, because you're saying something that's just interesting and I want to dig into it. You're saying that the sort of main claim that you were making, and I want to get into the subclaim, main claim is single payer would be better. And the main claim for that, the reason that you think that, is that it aligns incentives. Now, specifically, here's where I'm going. I just want to clarify what you mean here. Are you saying that because there are private companies who are trying to make money on, every aspect of this that they can access, basically, let's focus on the drugs for a second, they're going to try to drive the prices of those drugs up? However, what everybody wants when they're going to get medical care is pretty clearly for those prices to be low. Everybody other than the people who are producing those drugs, anybody who needs those drugs wants the price to be low. And so fundamentally what you're saying is that if you have a healthcare system, which has as on its one side, private companies trying to increase prices, and on its other side, everybody else basically demanding that those prices go down, you're going to have a dysfunctional system necessarily. Is that kind of your point?
Pretty much. And if you think about it, I mean, there are countries where don't have single-payer system. I'm talking about developed world and countries like, let's say, Germany, that has much better healthcare system than ours overall on all the statistics and all the parameters. So even if you don't have a single payer, at least what you need to do then, if you have, say, 3, 4, 5 large kind of national insurers, then you have to create some kind of a government control of all the pricing and everything. And in that sense, to me, that's not that far off of the single payer. But that's exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying that no matter what you do as a whole system, and, you know, you can try to put different checkpoints, like you can control some cost of drugs, you can, like with the vaccine now, right? I mean, the government could theoretically say, well, you know, it's an emergency, we're going to set the price this way. But guess what? It's never happened this way because, of course, the company comes and says, wait, but we have to make a profit. Otherwise, we're not going to exist. And then you start having negotiations. It's never going to stop until that level of negotiation going to be built into the system with a control checkpoint at the actual payer, not at the business side of it. Because right now, that's how it's driven. I'm not taking sides. I'm saying from perspective as a doctor, what I know, if tomorrow we have a single payer, well, tomorrow, too fast, but let's say we transition to a single payer over a period of time, chances are that the both doctors and patients going to love it. And yes, maybe some income for some doctors will go down. So guess what? Doctors themselves, many of them don't want it either.
Dr. Gogan, we're going to take a break, but I do want to point something out. In the UK, I don't remember which Olympics this was, but they did a tribute to their single-payer system. That's how much they loved the NHS. We're going to take a break. You guys are listening to the voice of Dr. Mikhail Kogan, Medical Director at the George Washington Center for Integrative Medicine, Associate Professor of Medicine at George Washington University, and founder and Executive Director of the AIM Health Institute, a Washington, D.C.-based nonprofit delivering integrative services to the underserved. Fault Lines, Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
This is Radio Sputnik.
Shooting from the lip.
We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people. Where we bring you people with controversial views. And indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. My name is Jamarl Thomas. We are here with Dr. Mikhail Kogan, Medical Director at the George Washington Institute for Integrative Medicine, Associate Professor of Medicine at George Washington University, and founder and Executive Director of the AIM Health Institute, a Washington, D.C.-based nonprofit delivering integrative services to the underserved. Dr. Kogan, once again, thank you for joining us. Let me ask you this. Let's get into the science of it for a bit. Has there been any research on either COVID-19 in and of itself, meaning either its propagation, either the composition, the makeup, or for that matter, treatments involving COVID? I know we talked about the vitamin C and maybe even the vitamin D. But how are those things progressing?
Updates? Anything new? I'm not sure I'm following.
Yes, I'm asking, is there anything new in regards to the science around COVID-19?
I'm trying to think what I can tell you new. So there's a lot of specifics about immunity that's been coming up. I don't think that's really this is really complicated. I think, did we talk about the fact that one of the big problems with COVID, it appears to trigger clotting all over the body. So clotting is a process where you have clots forming in different places. And, one of the potential reasons why the disease is so much worse than, say, flu or many other illnesses, it appears that process is universally happening simultaneously in every vessel, whether it's large or small. And in certain cases, that process starts to get so significant that the body basically has to constantly try to break the clots up. And that's one of the key drivers for inflammation, we think. And that's also one of the reasons. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, do they know why? Like, what's...
No, I don't think so. I think I listened to a really kind of advanced molecular or biochemistry lecture trying to explain this. I think it's certain viruses can affect our own immune system in such a way that the response itself triggers pathology, because the response gets out of the proportion. So let me put it this way. So let's say you have a small area where the virus sits. One of the ways the immune system can sort of wall it off, so to speak, is just to clot it off, right? So you clot off that vessel, and then whatever's in there is no longer have access to oxygen. It doesn't, the cells die and everything dies, and then the immune system kind of cleans it up. So if you have it done in a small area, a good example is a bruise, right? And you hit something really hard, you have a inflammation, you have a erythema, so redness, you have a heat, and then eventually it's cells. Now imagine, and there's a clotting in there going on too. So imagine now that happens on the whole body, and you really can't clean it up effectively, so you start kind of catch-22. So your inflammation starts to go up, and you can no longer cope with it. So that's actually exactly what happens. Why specifically this virus does it? I think there's some explanation on the molecular level. I don't think it's that interesting. I think it's interesting, but it's way too complicated. I'm not sure I can even correctly explain it. But bottom line, it does happen, and we don't have effective tools against it. That's the problem.
Wow, that's amazing.
Dr. Kogan, so this is, I'm just reading a little bit more about this now. I'd heard about it, but getting a little bit deeper into it. It seems, and I'll try to give, and I'm not going to give a full explanation because I can't, because I don't have the knowledge, obviously, the background knowledge. But it seems like you're saying, there's clotting in small blood vessels. Some things called complement proteins, which are basically the deposition deposited by immune molecules, molecules produced by your immune system to create an immune response, basically. And then those complement proteins, basically, it creates a sort of cascade. So it creates a small cascading effect that leads to inflammation on that local scale. So that's in blood vessels in the body. There's another side of this. Actually, I want to ask you about. Well, you know what? First of all, was I getting anything wrong there? I heard you starting to talk. I didn't want to cut you off. What did you have to say?
This is the normal process. So this is how clotting occurs. It's a complement process, and this is what students study in the first, second year of medical school. That's the normal process of clotting. There's a whole cascade that starts with platelets, and then you trigger the complement, and it's all ends up in a formation of a clot. And again, that's a controlled process. Problem is here, it's not controlled anymore. And I guess the key question is, why is it not controlled? I'm not sure that we have a clear answer.
Yeah, they're saying they found evidence that spike proteins that studded the outside of it were causing that. But that, like you're saying, that's just the process by which that works. The other side of this that I'd heard, this has to do with how it affects the brain. So, ACE2, for anybody looking at this, it's sort of one of these interfaces, as far as I can tell, that different types of cells will have to allow them to work with other parts of the body. Anyway, some of this, we were speculating that the brain would, in a lot of cases, be immune, because a lot of these cells in the brain apparently did not actually have ACE2 receptors. They then were saying that there is some other process by which COVID was infecting brain cells, and that specifically the way that it was doing it. And it's just interesting to see it. I've heard COVID described as like a tricky virus, or it's doing very counterintuitive things, very unpredictable things. I don't know how true that is. I'd be curious to hear your take. But specifically what they were saying it was doing in these brain cells was it was drowning neighboring cells of oxygen. And it was doing this in a way that evaded the normal immune response of the body. So that without the body sort of being able to respond, certain cells were being deprived of oxygen near to the ones that were infected, not the ones themselves that were infected. Do you know anything about that, Dr. Kogan?
No, I actually haven't heard that. But what I do know, and this is definitely worth discussing is that, and I have seen cases when there's a horrendous neurologic complications, and there have now been thousands of cases described, and people who sort of deny the whole pandemic, not worry about this. Okay, fine, you don't have to worry about certain things, but worry about this. There is a small percentage of patients who completely healthy, who after the illness develop basically a sudden onset Alzheimer's disease that will never recover. And what the trigger to that is not even, could this be what you're describing? Could this be what I said in terms of clotting? I don't think there's real clear clarity here. It's clear that it's not large vessel strokes if they do occur in the brain. They're small vessels, so they're kind of a microclotting. But if you clot out enough small vessels, you will get what sometimes described as vascular dementia in the brain, and maybe that's what's happening. But whatever it is, even if we find explanations soon, doesn't mean we're going to find a solution to it soon, because it seems like process itself, we don't have any handle on it in terms of therapeutics right now. So, the drug that tries to remdesivir is a good example, but remdesivir doesn't seem to kind of, it doesn't dramatically alter anything. So one specific new treatment I do want to bring up, and because I think it is dramatic. So this is it's a form of vitamin D, but it's not the form that we have access in America. So we do have it actually, but it's a prescription. It's a active form called Cofedidiol, and this form is basically what ends up after you take vitamin D3, which is getting converted in the kidneys after about a week. And when Spanish study, researchers gave this drug to active patients, so patients who were admitted with a mild to moderate COVID, they had in control group, they end up having 11 patients going into ICU and 2 die. And in an active group, it's a small study, but in an active group, they had no deaths and only 1 ICU admission. This is the most dramatic treatment I've seen on COVID. I have not seen any other study showing anything like this. Now, this is a double-blind...
Dr. Kogan, you cut out for a second. I think we're talking about the same... we may be talking about one that we've been talking about on the air. I didn't know that it was a special kind of vitamin D. I haven't been reporting that, and I want to get back to it. But I think it was something like 50 people on one side that were, I believe the 50 people were in the control group. No, the 50 people were in the group that was given vitamin D, if I'm remembering correctly. And then there were 26 people on the control side.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So it's a small study, but it's very well done. It was done.
What is the vitamin D? Just could you give the audience, could you maybe spell that if you could, or something like that, just so they can look it up for themselves if they're interested in checking that out?
Yeah. So, let's first say a few words about what vitamin D is. So vitamin D is it's actually a misunderstanding. So vitamin D is one of very few vitamins that's actually a hormone. So instead of regulating, usually vitamins are essential in some kind of specific biochemical pathways as cofactors. Vitamin D is really a hormone, so it regulates a lot of other functions. And the importance of vitamin D, you all know, right? It regulates immune system. It regulates how the calcium gets deposited and processed in the bones. It's really important for the muscle function. So it's a very broad effect. And vitamin D we can consume, so we can eat it. Like it's present in certain foods, like for example, it's added to the milk. We also can take it in the form of vitamin D3 or D2, which are the sort of supplemental occurring forms. And also, there are several drugs. There's actually lots of drugs that are vitamin D, either analogs and synthetic, or kind of more natural forms that are more active. So the active form that was studied in this trial called Cofedidiol, Talcifediol. And the reason I think these researchers use this is because when you take vitamin D3, you have about a week to 10-day lag before that vitamin D3 becomes active and starts really being fully functional. Now, of course, we're supposed to take vitamin D all the time. So when you take it daily, that effective activation gets covered because, whatever you took a week ago is going to work today. But when you go to a hospital with an acute illness, I think they smartly figured out you don't have that period of time. If you wait for a week, you're really, really sick. So they gave something that was immediately active. I think that's what probably was distinguishing this study from many others. And
that's very actually much. One quick. This is outside of COVID, but just for a second, we only got about 2 minutes left. Vitamin D, I've often heard before actually that vitamin D is not as effective if you take it as a pill, but that was without getting into the details of what kind of vitamin D you were taking, or if you're taking like you brought up calcifediol, which in the U.S. would be prescribed. In other words, you couldn't get it over the counter. Would this outside of COVID would that also, if you were to take calcifediol, would that be more effective than taking what most people would take if they just bought it on a store shelf, Dr. Kogan, just for getting regular vitamin D levels up? Is that better?
Oh, but in America we don't have it. We have it only as a drug at over $1,000 a month, and I'm not sure that insurance will cover it. So, that's and on top of that, I'll tell you what, it's incorrect to say that what you take orally is different from what you get from sun. You get from sun exactly the same thing. The issue is when you take it orally, a lot of it still needs to get converted. Your kidneys are normal. That's easy. Then you can get it converted. If your kidneys are not working, then you will get this form by prescription, and insurance will cover it, hopefully. So
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
I'd heard some stuff about how potentially, it would be better to just get outside. In other words, usually it's recommended if you're low on vitamin D, you can supplement, but you can also just, be out in the sun, and your skin will do that too. And so I'd heard. I guess I was curious. We can come back to it. We have you on pretty frequently, but I think you also did give a great answer, Dr. Kogan. Thank you for joining us. I appreciate it. For everybody listening, Dr. Kogan is the founder and executive director of the AIM Health Institute. That is a Washington D.C. based nonprofit. He's also the medical director at the George Washington Center for Integrative Medicine and an associate professor of medicine at George Washington University. We'll be back in a minute with our last 2 hours. You've been listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, welcome to your daily inoculation for propaganda. In the left corner, I am the indefatigable, ever vigilant, the last antibody to a sick and seizing political system, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And on the West Coast and in the politically independent corner, I am your incoherent but exuberant Shane Stranahan.
And you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Let's get to some headlines. In the news, PBS reporter Yamiche Alcindor is reporting the following in a tweet. A source familiar says City of Louisville has agreed to pay Breonna Taylor's family $12 million. Note, the city also says it will implement reforms. The officers involved in the Taylor deaths have not been arrested or charged. Going to the election news. During ABC News Townhall in Pennsylvania, President Donald Trump on Tuesday claimed that he, quote unquote, upplayed the severity of the coronavirus pandemic. This despite telling Bob Woodward in March that he wanted to always play it down, which is exactly what he did. This is taking place as Joe Biden visited Florida for the first time since winning the candidacy, saying that Trump has done nothing but assault the dignity of the Hispanic families over and over and over and over again. Not like Obama, who just deported 3 million of them. Nancy Pelosi and other members of Congress are calling for an investigation into an ICE detention center in Georgia, which has been accused of denying some needed medical care and forced unnecessary hysterectomies from an outside doctor. TikTok's parent company, ByteDance, said it plans to retain a majority stake in the United States version of the app that Oracle will most likely be operating. Palestinians exchanged fire with the Israeli government forces just hours after signing the peace deal between Israel, the UAE, and Bahrain in Washington. Trump called the peace deal dawn of a new Middle East, quote unquote. The peace deal only briefly mentions Palestinians, calling for a just, comprehensive, and enduring resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. These are the first new agreements in 26 years. The European Commission president has called for a Green New Deal and a package to recover from the pandemic, and has said that the vaccine nationalism threatens lives, referencing individual countries' attempts to attain and distribute the vaccine outside of the guidance of a larger authority. More than 3.3 million square miles of California land has burnt this year. More than 27 times as much was burned from last year. Senator Kamala Harris visited the town of Aubrey, California, near the burn from the Creek Fire, to speak alongside California emergency officials and the state's Governor Gavin Newsom. While there, she criticized the fact that we are in the midst of an incredible crisis because our climate is changing in drastic form, which is leading California burning in many places, which is leading to storms hitting our Gulf Coast repeatedly year after year and getting worse. Where was she to tell that to Obama? Interestingly enough. Hurricane Sally has increased in strength to a Category 2 hurricane as it hit the coast of Alabama this morning at 5:45 a.m. Eastern. According to the National Hurricane Center, it's going to cause historic and catastrophic flooding, quote unquote, in parts of northwest Florida and southern Alabama. Also, watch out for Hurricane Teddy, which is currently tracking near the Virgin Islands and expected to become a major storm by the weekend. Those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. I want to talk a bit about hypocrisy. Let's talk hypocrisy. When Kamala Harris, a Democrat, can go and wag her finger at either the Trump administration for not backing climate science, I don't understand how they do that. Now, Gavin Newsom was signing oil contracts out the yin-yang, and Obama was God of oil. Now, I called him God of oil because he was God of oil. He did, from the standpoint of expanding oil, he did a phenomenal job in doing that. Now, the catch becomes, do you believe it or don't you believe it? If you come out and tell me that I believe that climate change is going to destroy the world, and I believe it so fervently, okay, how fervently do you believe it? Well, logically, if you do believe it, there's going to be some kind of action, right, that takes place to back up the fact that you believe it. Otherwise, you're just believing it and it's kind of be thrown away. That doesn't entirely mean anything. So you would think that the person would say, look, we're going to have to take policies that protect coal workers, but those jobs are going to have to go. And we're going to have to reshape our society in a way that is more sustainable so we don't die. That's not what happened under Obama. Nor did that happen under Trump. And you could make a case that maybe Trump is more honest about it and just say, I don't believe it. Yes, that I don't believe it is a horrific position to take. By the same token, is it not more honest than I believe it, but I am not going to do anything about it? Now, I get annoyed when I see stuff like this because I recognize the hypocrisy of it. Now, if you're a Democrat and you're only listening to Democrats, meaning you're only a Rachel Maddow listener, you will hear Kamala Harris and you'll be like, yes, I like her. She's hitting them hard. She was a prosecutor, but she was a progressive prosecutor. That's what they would say to themselves. But the reality of it is, her party is just as instrumental as Republicans in making this worse. Whether you hit a cliff or hit a brick at 90 miles an hour, or whether you hit it at 70, aren't you not still dying in the fact of that crash, regardless if you may feel a little bit better about yourself for going 20 miles less? What do you think, Shane? I think we have problems. We have fires on one end of the country. We have floods on the other. And that doesn't touch the pandemic. That doesn't touch the people out of a job, millions. That doesn't even touch the technological innovation that is going to take place right now because of all of the people who are going to lose their jobs in retail. And people like Jeff Bezos or the Walton family is going to say, hey, this bump in cash is going to allow us to find better ways to get these items to these people without a store out there. Meaning, yes, there are going to be some people who are going to profit magnificently and others who are not. None of those things are being dealt with at all, as far as I can tell. And like I said, this is a question of competence regarding your society. Both parties. Now, Shane, what do you have to say of this? Because you may say, well, clearly the political instrument has failed, and the question becomes, what else is there? And I do think that's an interesting question. I got to be honest, I don't know the answer to that question, though.
Yeah, so I mean, the answer to that question is that when political instruments fail, they actually don't fail for long, because usually they're either overcome by outside influences who want to eat the system, or they're saved by inside forces. So it's an existential question at this point of which of the two is going to happen. We're going to effectively be eaten by, whether it's other countries or international corporations, whether the leftovers of the American state are going to be picked apart by some larger entity, or we're going to revitalize ourselves and come together in some sense as a nation. Yeah. I mean, the thing about that is, like, if you're looking at the issue of climate change, I think the implicit sense for it's faded recently, but for the last century approximately, since Woodrow Wilson, I would argue, is, with the League of Nations, is that there's going to be some intergovernmental body that can steward, a worldwide process. And now in the 21st century, looking into the 22nd century on that time scale, yeah, it's going to have to be something different. Instead of a single worldwide organization, it would have to be a balance of the interests of all these different powers. So I see that happening. I see the potential for that. The other side of this stuff, though, I mean, going back to the states, I'm going to set the hurricanes aside. Hurricanes, as far as I can tell, yes, definitely climate change. California's forests, partially climate change through, for instance, drought, and human-caused ecological devastation in the whole California basin, the whole San Joaquin Valley, everything.
Even
part of it.
Power lines, meaning even the way that they allocate resources from the standpoint of what do we want to do with maintaining our power lines. California could take a hint from Germany and put those things underground. They don't do that. That's expensive. They don't even trim the lines and whatnot. I mean, that was one of the causes of the other fires that had taken place. But go ahead. Yeah. I'm sorry. I
mean, no, you're totally, no, there are definitely huge sides of this that are due to human intervention, but it's also, I mean, arguably a lot of it. But here are a couple of sort of counterfacts for it. Historically, like in the prehistoric record, because again, we're talking about California's worst fire year on record. In the prehistoric record, more forest burned on an annual basis by far than we have now. If you go back and look at the burn, it was something like 4.4 million acres per year. It was in hectares, and then I did the conversion. 4.4 million acres per year on average. Pre-1800 are the estimates. Now, here's the thing. That comes with a greater forest coverage because, when we came and we sort of civilized the place or colonized it or whatever, when we affected everything and disrupted everything, we reduced the forest's extent. That means less of it would burn each year. But still, in the last decade or so, we've dramatically dropped it down. And so when this year we're getting what would have been prehistorically an average burn season, but it was 20, I think it's either 27 or 29 times we reported in headlines what it was last year. That disparity is huge. The fact is we're not burning enough. And the larger fact is our conversations about it's true. The larger conversations about these things are pretty damn skewed. We're not burning enough because we're not managing our forests effectively. And there's a whole deep history there where environmentalists have gotten a lot of things right and some things wrong. And I say that as somebody, who wants to conserve the environment pretty deeply. I don't know. I feel like I'm going to give my sum up issue or my sum up take, my sort of bizarre personal take on this stuff, which is we are not thinking about the climate in nearly the right way. Right now, we're thinking about reducing emissions when what we should be thinking about is how to, on a large scale, renature the planet. Where, for instance, before European immigration and really before human immigration tens of thousands of years ago, North America, just looking at North America, was home to massive herbivorous species, massive megafauna. You look at the Great Bison Belt, this massive region of the North American continent that we wiped out. Specifically, Europeans wiped out the bison there. It sustained this massive grassland prairie ecosystem that was not just a source of great sink for the world's carbon. It was also just a flourishing ecosystem with life, a lot of life. The bison were really this linchpin species holding that ecosystem together. I think if we're going to think about solving climate change, we need to think on the level of recreating that kind of thing. Now, there are some organizations that do cool work, like the American Prairie Reserve actually is focusing on creating, like buying up private land. You can look into it, trying to create I think they were billing it as either the world's or America's largest national reserve, but they should damn well try to make it the world's largest national reserve while they're at it. Buying up private land, making it a public space, and trying to rehabilitate it basically for bison to live there. If we can get those kinds of large-scale ecological restoration projects going in a way that preserves, human society and human civilization and mobilizes the best in us, I think we can see a flourishing world. And I think we could see that within a century or two.
That's not going to happen.
Where the conversation is right now.
Yeah, that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, honestly,
Maybe.
Because look, even there is nobody in real honest terms talking about doing anything for climate change. It's not. I mean, they may say we're going to try to do it in the context of maintaining our capitalistic system, meaning it's climate on the cheap. These scientists are basically saying your world is at risk. I just read a report from the New York Times for the talking about habitat loss, talking about all of these species basically have just died out. And do you think any of us care? Like be honest.
Yeah.
Like
I think a lot of people do.
I think a lot of people do, but nobody that matters.
I can hear it.
But nobody that matters.
I think you do. No, I think some of the people in power do care. I think it's a problem of not enough people maybe, and the system constraining their choices. Again, you're talking about capitalism.
Yes.
My problem criticizing capitalism is not that I don't like capitalism.
I'm not hitting.
I don't like what people usually prescribe.
No. I'm not hitting capitalism.
I don't want state socialism.
Shane, I'm not hitting capitalism.
But here's my point.
And you often frame this stuff between capitalism and socialism. I'm talking about something that's flat fact reality. This is not a philosophical conversation. I'm saying that the reason they don't do things is because it impacts their wallet. Now, or let's say profitability.
What are the deeper structural causes of this stuff? I mean, again, we can get into that conversation, and we often do, and I like to get into deeper levels of it. But
I'm making the point. Wait. I'm just making a very basic point.
On that level.
It intervenes on any notion of getting anything done from the standpoint of anything else. Meaning, if it affects an individual's profit, or for that the power structure's profit, it doesn't get done. That's my point. All of this is in the context of, okay, hey, we want to do a climate on the cheap.
That's my point too.
Okay, let's take a break. Let's take a break. We'll come back because we have callers. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
What do we want? News, politics, and culture. When do we want it? Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay.
Tune in to Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C., and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri, daily for our analytical fix. No surrender!
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And you're not just listening, hopefully. You're also calling in, hopefully. Our number is 202-521-1320. You should call it now. We've got Demetrius calling in from D.C. Demetrius, you're on. How are you doing?
Pretty good, boss. Pretty good. So here we go. I got a question challenge for you. Have you seen the pictures of California fires where all the trees are still standing and buildings and cars are demolished? And I mean, I understand your narrative. You guys are logic thinkers, but you guys are based on what they're telling you. You know, they're telling you it's arson. They're telling you it's global warming. But how does a forest fire not consume the trees, but demolishes all the houses in between? I mean, forest fire is supposed to, continuously, burn the ground and everything.
They seem to be. I mean, I was near one. I've seen them. I literally have driven by several of these fires, and frankly, I haven't seen them burning houses. I've seen them burning trees.
Just so we're clear, you're basing this off of what? Meaning, you're basing this notion. Okay, based on wait. Just so I'm clear, based on pictures, you're coming away with an assessment that houses are being burnt down, but trees are not being burnt down. That's what you're telling us.
Pictures, there's the same evidence that you always collect on a daily basis. There's videos. There's a lot of firemen talking about it. Just research it. Google it. I mean, you're saying those people made it up, that the trees are... I mean, how... I've seen a tree burning from inside. How... There's... In Italy, there's a documentary where... I forgot the name of the documentary, where everybody started to leave their houses and turned out that there was a military ship far away conducting electromagnetic. I'm telling you, I'm in D.C. I'm not afraid of this, but I'm just telling you, this is weird. How can a building get demolished? Look at it yourself. And the trees are still standing. Fire's supposed to burn everything on its way.
Thank you for the call, Demetrius.
Okay, so I don't know specifically what you're referencing. I don't have any background with this stuff. It would be good if you gave us the name of the documentary or some kind of lead that I could follow up on. It sounds like you're suggesting that the fires are serving as cover for EMT, like weapon testing. EMP weapon testing. I don't know that. I don't have any knowledge about that. Nothing on that.
Just from a basic logical point of view, honestly. If a fire starts, I would imagine the fire is going to burn whatever is susceptible to being burnt. And I don't have this belief that it's going to give a tree a pass and go for a house or vice versa, whatever's susceptible to being burned. I don't have to be there for that. I've seen fire burn stuff down enough. Look, I remember one time in my apartment, my mom calls me. I think she calls me at 6 a.m. And she says, "Boo, are you okay?" I say, "Yeah, what's going on?" She says, "Look out your window." And the apartment across from me was burning to the ground, where somebody left like a timber or something on the back and it just kind of took the whole thing down. That's what a fire looks like to me. That's my impression of a fire. So I don't, is it possible? Like some 0.0002% chance that there's a electromagnetic test going on somewhere? Okay, yeah, I can't say what I don't know, but
I guess my confusion here is that there's not something that needs to be explained away.
Right.
It's incredibly
right.
Like the fires happening. We're just talking about how historically California has massive forest fires are the cyclical thing when if the forests aren't managed well, you're just going to get these flash fires that come through and tear everything up. This is one of those years. Here's the thing: if you have compelling evidence, talk about it. Like, I'm not trying to shut stuff down. But it sounds like you saw pictures or you heard somebody talking about video or you saw video that looked confusing because houses were burnt down and trees weren't. Now, I could come up with a couple of simple explanations that come to the top of my mind for why that might be the case, but I don't. It's just too little.
Unnecessary,
you're
right?
saying look at some
It's so unnecessary.
You thought exactly.
It's so unnecessary.
We're taking calls 202-521-1320. You can join the conversation if you want to. Talking about California's forest fires, climate change stuff, talking about a bunch of stuff. So you can call in with,
going to the Green New Deal thing, for example. Look, what I was trying to say was, and I wasn't trying to shut you down on that. I was just trying to make the basic point that, to me, this is not. Yes, I mean, we talk in the framework of an economic system just because this is our economic system and it pervades everything around us. But when I'm talking about this stuff, I'm talking about this stuff in terms of real terms, not in economic terms. The economics is not real. The human beings are, and the fact that the climate or the habitable space is changing in a way that could be detrimental to those human beings, that is real. My problem is that this is overlaced by another reality of sorts that is not entirely real, that's more conceptual, that will say we're okay with doing something about climate, providing we can maintain our station and the metrics that have been going on up to this point in some way continue. Well, that's not really doing anything about climate. That's my point. Like, if somebody says your life is at stake, your existence on this planet itself is at stake, and they're saying, yeah, we get that, but, oh, man, I mean, we can't change the way we've been operating, right? And it's like, but your existence is at stake. It's a Star Trek episode, right? Where these guys go to a planet full of water. These creatures are living in a water planet. And Janeway is talking to the person, and they're realizing that, look, the way you're going is destroying your world. Your world is getting smaller and smaller. At some point, you're not going to be able to live in it. And they're like, yeah, we get that. But, I mean, we have a way of life here. And they're like, what do you mean you have a way of life? You're killing yourself. And they couldn't understand how the people could just basically say, we have a way of life, kick rocks, versus their perspective of, you guys are going to die. Yeah, I mean, that's a weird, I mean, it's almost like a complete disassociation from the standpoint of we believe these scientists in every other capacity except this, because this affects how we operate. And I think that is detrimental to life, if I'm being honest. Yeah, that's not hopeful. I'm sorry.
Maybe it's no. Sorry, I did not mean to cut you off. And you know what? We've got a caller. I was going to say something, but let's just go to the call. We're also still taking calls. 202-521-1320 is the number. Malik calling in from DC. Malik, you're on the line. What's going on?
Good morning, fellas. I very quickly, I think if on your off time, I think you guys should look a little closer into what the last caller was saying about the fires, and look into, I'll just say, look into what people are discussing about the Paradise, California fires a few years ago. But the reason I'm calling in is you guys have touched on, particularly you, Jamarl. You've touched on the subject of, and I don't know if you've done it jokingly, the subject of the hidden hand. And I wanted to touch on also the gentleman you had on talking about Lebanon and the explosion in Beirut. And I want you guys to consider, just consider that we're at a pivotal point. And even on that subject of Star Trek, at that point at which humanity took the next step towards a greater paradigm, that we are possibly at that point right now. And for lack of a better term, this hidden hand is attempting to prevent humanity from making that step. And I think the masses, in many ways, and I've called in before and told you that I grew up amongst the grassroots and political organizing community in New York City, but I'm forced lately to step into that greater paradigm of my spiritual training, my esoteric training, my alternative healing training, because in the political community, I feel that we are too rigid. Yes. We are too narrow in our views. Yes. And right now we have an element within our society and within our world that is attempting to regress humanity and prevent humanity from making that next step.
Malik, and I love that.
Everything that you're talking about.
Wait, I think at some level, I think you're right. Let me say it on 2 points. I don't know if you remember Murray Ann Williamson when she was trying to get into when she was in the Democratic primary. And my thought was always, she's absolutely right, and I have no idea how that fits in politics. It's like she's trying to get at something that goes more to the core of the person and to the core of the society as a result. And it's hard to translate that because that needs to be translated to some degree into policy. And to be honest, the political space doesn't value those virtues of that she wants to espouse. On the second point, I can agree with you that it looks like something that's trying to grab society and pull it back from the deep. What I would point out, though, is that doesn't necessarily have to be a specific individual. That could just be interests. Meaning, if you have something that is extraordinarily valuable, what do you do to protect the thing that's valuable? I would say that we've had a certain status quo in this country that's gotten so bad, gotten so to the point, that what you're considering a tipping point is that things have just gotten so bad, it's hard to see how they get worse, and at some point need to change. And the question is, does it change or does it burn? Look, I don't have this belief that there's some greater thing that may save us. And I honestly can't see it. Like, I look at our interests in this country and what we fight for. I look at some of the things that we do, the terrorism that we inspire in some cases, the people that we buy off in order to knock this guy over or to undermine that country. And we rah-ride. I mean, Kamala Harris goes out, gives a speech the other day where she goes she's talking about 9/11, and she says this is like the most brimming moment for our country and all this other stuff. And I'm like, we went on a murder campaign in the Middle East. Like, what are you talking about? Like, even if you're saying, yes, we need to honor the people that died, etc., that's fine. But the moment that you go beyond that point and you talk about our response, it was ghastly. And yet, rah, 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 rah. Like, there's never an honest accounting. And because there's never an honest accounting, it's like, all right, where does this go? How far into unreality can you go with this until something crashes? And then you get Trump as your president. Shane, you would probably say something about first principles on this. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm mischaracterizing. But how do you see it?
I will. That's a good assumption. Thank you for asking. No, I'm going to say that the sky is not actually falling. The world is not over. I don't know. I think we live in a civilization. We're sort of manicured in some sense, and we've thankfully been prevented from we've been protected from the worst excesses of violence for all of our lives, the vast majority of the people listening to this.
Right.
And there are a lot of worldwide crises, but if you look on the historical record, yes, we're facing some fundamentally new ones in terms of the scale, but a lot of these are a lot older. And a lot of the ones that people are getting worried about have just happened. Every once in a while, a state crumbles. And every once in a while, a lot of people die in a war. These kinds of things happen all the time, and thankfully we've had a reprieve from them. But I guess one way of looking at all this stuff is, I don't know, the caller, thank you for the call, Malik. One thing real quick I want to get back to on the campfire you mentioned in Paradise. I was looking back into that. I just don't know where you said we should look into it. There's something sort of fishy about it. Maybe call back in if you have more info. I don't know what the fishy thing that you're suggesting is. I couldn't find it doing quick research. Of course, if Google's going to suppress something or whatever, it would be that kind of a thing. I'm not going to shut down conspiracy theories right off the bat. Some conspiracy theories are totally true. I just guess I don't know exactly where you're going with it. And I think the larger point that I want to get to with it is my model of history at this point has to do with technology and philosophy and these deeper forces on levels in terms of like the structure of society and the structure of what humans are capable of. If you're going to determine the course of human history, it's like what we're capable of doing, what the guiding influences are. And with what we're capable of doing, it's technology. And with what the guiding influences are, it's going to be philosophy and religion. And so I think that's my theory of history. At one point, you mentioned the hidden hand, and I brought up the hiding hand, this idea from Albert Otto Hirschman earlier. It's a different thing than what you're talking about. I think you're talking about just this idea of a hidden influence. Those exist, those come and those go, but I don't think those are as significant as a lot of people make them out to be. I think in the process, if we assume that there is a hidden influence or like one or two hidden influences on this high level in terms of a secret society or some extraterrestrial entities or whatever, there are all different directions that you can take these theories in. I view those almost religiously, and I'm going to stir up some dirt probably with people there, but it's like a surrogate for religion where you're creating this outside agent. And I just try not to do that. If I do it, it's with these abstractions like technology and philosophy and ideas, science, whatever. Anyway, we're going to go into a break.
Yeah.
We'll be back in a second. We're talking with Manila Chan, and you're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm here with my co-host, Shane Stranahan. We have with us for this 30 minutes for this break, Manila Chan. Manila Chan is a veteran news anchor and host of RT America's daily news program, In Question. Manila, welcome back to the show.
Good morning, gentlemen. How are you?
We're doing all right. Thank you for joining us today. We were going to talk to you about back to school, meaning whether or not this has been a success or fail. Now, I think the last time you were on, I think I've been pretty down on the idea of sending kids back to school. being very questionable about this notion of these kids passing this stuff on to adults. And basically that is literally what took place. In some cases, the teachers or the janitorial staff, or for that matter, some of the kids themselves, especially as they get older, were becoming ill, with many of the colleges having to send the kids back home. Now, I'm going to ask you, am I given a fair assessment of that when I point that out, that this is going monstrously bad, and it was foreseeable that it was going to be so?
I mean, yes, but there are caveats to that, Jamarl. I would say, I mean, it's been demonstrably bad in the sense of, have there been more infections, including, like you mentioned, the teachers, the janitorial staff, the general administration staff. Of course, we knew that was going to happen. We knew that children were also going to get sick. But the caveat to the kids is obviously the majority of kids who have been sick, especially the little ones, are recovering fairly normally, although they're experiencing some weird symptoms that people have speculated about, or doctors, I should say, have speculated about for several months about, how kids respond to coronavirus in their body, which, they're having these weird muscle inflammation and weird internal inflammation that adults are not experiencing. So yes, I mean, to that degree, I would say the assessment that we kind of all arrived at a few months ago was that this was bound to happen, yes. And the other demonstrable failure is that we knew that American servers and networks were not going to be ready for the gigantic tsunami of children who were going to be logging on, right? We talked about how especially kids in lower income areas, we could talk about different wards, locally in DC, where internet is terrible and spotty, and some people don't have it at home. They don't have the computers or the technology for their kids to log on. Schools have been scrambling to try to get that done. They've been trying to get additional loans and funding to be able to buy these Chromebooks or netbooks or what have you for the kids. So, I mean, overall, I would say it's been pretty bad.
Now, and it didn't have to be that way, by the way. Like the point that you're making is, look, we knew that these kids were going to have these devices in order to connect with some kind of network or something in order to get this done at home. The resources should have been there for those kids to be able to do just that. And it wasn't. It's almost like, sleepwalking into something that you already knew was going to be difficult as is. So what are they going to do from here on out? Do you know? I mean, what's the playbook at this point? Now that it's like, okay, putting these kids here may not have been the best of ideas. And maybe we should have thought a little bit more about how we were going to have the connectivity once these kids were not there. So what's next? What's the new plan, or what's the new playbook that states are enacting at this point?
Well, I mean, I don't know about every individual state. Obviously, I can talk about, some of the bigger suburban school districts and how they're trying to make up for these shortcomings locally. I mean, the kids that do have the devices, there's another problem, by the way, with the kids that are logging on, but that's a whole civil liberties issue with kids getting in trouble for snacking while they have been logging online to their Zoom class or their Blackboard class. But there really is no plan. And that is the scary thing, is that we have had 6 months to plan for back to school. And this entire country, not just state by state, just the entire country has really, really failed our children. They, the Gen Zers are supposed to be the ones that are going to save this world, save this country, and it all starts locally. But we can't even get them educated properly. And then the ones that can log on to school, we're now punishing them for even having snacks or drinking while you're, quote, in online class. So there are a lot of issues that schools need to work out. Obviously, the big stuff like getting Blackboard to their networks and servers to handle the load of children, number one, if you're going to do online school. But number two, the kids that are at home doing this online school, come on, really? I mean, I think you have bigger fish to fry than getting kids in trouble for snacking. I mean, what are you going to do? Suspend them and send them home? I mean, they're home. There's that problem there. The kids that are going physically back to school, and there are many, many schools. I mean, I would say around close to 40% of schools across this country are physically back learning in the classroom. And obviously you got to pray for them and hope that they're all okay. But the kids that are back in school now, we're also finding out that a lot of their school ventilations are in disrepair, because they're saying that this is, coronaviruses obviously can be spread through the air, and the ventilation systems are very poor and outdated. We know in basically every school across this country, the last thing we think about is the air conditioning system or the heating system at most schools, even in nice suburban neighborhoods like Northern Virginia. But then you think about kids that are that I mentioned earlier, the kids that are in lower income areas. I mean, they have ceiling tiles falling on them, and then they have to worry about breathing in coronavirus through the ventilation system. So I don't know that any school district or state or this country, if Betsy DeVos has really planned out any plan of action. It's just been a complete failure in every which way, and nobody has really presented a real path forward on what to do. And obviously there's going to be infighting when you get down to the nitty-gritty of individual school districts about how you want to proceed with the coming year. I'm seeing a lot of reports about schools saying that this online learning is going to be a couple of months and they're going to figure things out, and hopefully, in the next quarter, kids will be back in school. But they're not.
But who would want to go back to school? I mean,
right.
Even online, if they're having to deal with the civil liberties issues that you're talking about. Thank you for joining us, Manila. This is Shane.
Hi, Shane.
The other thing is you brought up ventilation. We actually got kind of early notice of that a bit over a month ago. We had a caller call in who I don't want to misrepresent. Anybody can go back and check it. I forget the exact show. Anyway, he was saying he doesn't work for a school district, but he was installing ventilation. He works to install ventilation in schools. And what he was saying is this stuff's expensive. The larger your school gets, and the more out of date it is, the more up to date you're going to need to bring it, and the more that's going to cost. And for a lot of schools, it's just going to be overwhelming. And that was a sort of lurking iceberg then. And it's interesting to hear you talking about that now. Kind of hadn't thought about that in a little bit. So I was unschooled. I kind of have a vested interest in homeschooling. About a little over a month ago, there were a spate of articles that were coming out about homeschooling and about parents trying to, seeing the upcoming failure of the school system, worried about their kids getting sick or their kids bringing the virus back home, even just worried about, how inefficient the school system would be and that there might be better ways to deal with it, especially as so many people are working at home. This was a thing a month ago, but in September, it seems to have kind of died out. Have you heard more about that? Do you know what's happened there? Is it just schools opening back up and people seeing less of a need for organizing that kind of thing? What's your take, Manila?
Well, from the different parents I've spoken to and people that work in the cyber field, I'll call it that, cyber security experts and what have you. Some of them are homeschooling parents, and they have actually brought to my attention that homeschooling is very different than this, current online COVID school online learning, in that homeschooling is done on the parent's schedule, basically, right? So a parent can still maintain their job or work 9 to 5, let's say, and then they come home, and then the online parenting school, homeschooling happens. The schooling that we're seeing now is based on a regular school day, so more or less around 8 to 3 p.m. And the civil liberties problem is appearing for those kids who are doing the vast majority of kids, of American kids, who are doing the 8 to 3 regular school day. They brought to my attention that kids that are registered for homeschooling, where the parents have to be the teachers and they have to, build out the workflow for the kids, and it revolves around the parents' availability. And there's nobody there to check but the parents. those kids seem to be adapting just fine because they've been doing this for a while, right? Those parents are doing just fine because they've figured out a workaround with their, some parents being full-time at-home parents. And then you have the parents that have found a way to work their 9-to-5 job and come home and then teach the kids. The problem we're seeing is the kids who are forced to resume school based on the Blackboard program or whatever other program that their local school district has signed up for. The civil liberties issue is appearing because these kids are supposed to behave as if they are in a classroom, when really in real life, they're sitting in the middle of their living room, right? There's no actual workspace. I mean, not many people can afford a special classroom room in their house, right? Most people are going to have their kids sit down in the living room. And in many cases, it's 2 or 3 kids sharing one space. What are the chances that those kids are going to be able to actually differentiate that they are, sure, they're sitting in their living room, but they're really sitting in their virtual classroom? There are kids that are these are little kids. They're not able to differentiate that in their heads. And teachers are starting to, I don't know how they're punishing these kids, but they're starting to call the parents and scold the parents for letting them drink juice and, you know, have a snack in the middle of the class. And these are parents that, by the way, are forced to either quit their jobs, or at least right now we've been back in school about a week. So I personally know some parents that have had to take time off from work because they didn't know what they were going to do, because the school district took forever to figure out whether they were going to do full online learning, whether they were going to have, you know, some days in, some days out.
And this was different depending upon the school district, because there was no top-down administration in regards to what they were going to do or plan, basically.
Correct. There was nothing. There were no like statewide mandates in any 50 state or territory in this country. There was no, like you said, no top-down direction for school districts. So these are varying. For example, I live in Northern Virginia. One school district, you can say Alexandria versus Arlington versus, you know, just pick any 3 of them. And they have 3 different plans and 3 different sets of rules. And I mean, it could be literally one block over, one kid could be in this school district, and one block over, the kid could be in the other school district. They all have different plans. And you know what? Kids are going to go out and play, and kids talk. And they, you know, one kid might be okay with, you know, their school might be okay with them having a snack, whereas the other kid isn't.
Yeah, that's not going to go well.
No, guys, no, it's not going to go well.
Let's bring you back. We're going to come back with Manila, the voice you listen to, Manila Chan, veteran news anchor and host of RT America Daily's news program, In Question. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com. By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, you know, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind: color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik. Fault Lines.
And you're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan and Manila Chan. Manila, thank you again for being with us. We're talking about schools and homeschools in the last segment. I want to move to another side of the pandemic, actually, some of the other unintended consequences. Talking actually first about single-use plastic bags. And specifically the issue, interesting like environmental sides of this. We've actually had callers and we've been having a conversation recently about whether people care more or less during the pandemic about a few critical issues, things like war, for instance. We also were talking about recycling, and specifically the fact that recycling is not financially feasible. A lot of trash gets shipped overseas and just deposited in landfills somewhere, either here or abroad. There's another side of this with masks. I'm just curious, this issue of recycling, I think you know something about this. Are you familiar with this issue of how the pandemic has affected sort of the global littering situation, the global, how much refuse people are creating that they're not going to, that's not going to be recycled. It's just being created and then wasted. The other side of this, though, I'm going to hand it over to you. The other side of this that would sort of strike in the opposite direction is just during the early days of the pandemic, we had a global industrial slowdown that obviously started and it was centered in China at first. I would think it would have worked in the opposite direction at first, but then I could see potentially people doing more of this stuff now. Anyway, I think you might know something about this. Manila, please take it away.
As a disclaimer, I certainly am no environmental expert, no scientist, but I'll call myself a layperson observer, and being born and raised in the Los Angeles area, where I think a lot of this ecological movement kind of started across this country, with the banning of disposable bags or single-use plastics. We started moving away from the styrofoam containers for takeout food. Those started happening, I would say, in the early 2000s. And, it's kind of swept the country. And that's what we were seeing prior to this pandemic. The big hubbub about Starbucks getting rid of their famous green plastic straws, right? But there are a lot of downsides to coronavirus, but the unintended downside to this was the environment. Now, initially, we saw it was kind of a blip, I would say, on the good stuff happening to the environment when coronavirus first hit. CO2 emissions were down initially, 19, 20% or so from the year 2, 3, 4, 5 years prior. We're back now, though, to only about 5% down from where it was. We saw environmental noise reduction levels down. And those are all, the anthropogenic activities from commercial travel, cars, buses, trains, planes, all that stuff. All that was down. So that was a good thing. We were seeing cleaner air than we had ever seen not ever, but at least in recent memory in the past decade, because everybody was locked down. Those are, global lockdown measures that we were seeing March, April, May, June. But then the summer hit, and I think either people got complacent or too comfortable. They started going back out. People started going back, as beaches reopened, national parks started reopening, and we started seeing more pollution in the waste that people were leaving behind, because guess what? Single-use plastics made a comeback, because the EPA basically quietly overturned, or at least temporarily gave reprieve to companies to use stuff like styrofoam packaging, plastic packaging, straws, plastic knives and forks and spoons or what have you for the takeout, because restaurants, were not allowing people to dine in, so everything was takeaway. But then those people would take those meals away and go to the beach and go to a national park, and they would leave their trash behind. Or in some cases, the trash, even if you tried to dispose of it properly, a lot of the recycling and waste management facilities nearby were shut down, or they were furloughed. People were put on leave. So trash and recycling was literally left to pile up in our national parks and across our beaches. So we are seeing increased waste of masks and PPE and straws and all these single-use plastic bags that were once banned across various localities and based on their local ordinances. And then the PPE that we're seeing that's left behind, not only could it be contaminated with COVID, but a lot of that PPE is actually treated with non-biodegradable chemicals. So that's kind of worrying to me as somebody that grew up, in California, where we appreciate our beaches, and nothing would drive me more crazy than to see people leaving behind those red Solo cups after, their beach party. And it's very sad that we're starting to see this come back as an indirect impact on our environment. It's just very sad that you see how intricate we are, so interconnected to one another. So even when you try to do the right thing and you're forced to use a styrofoam takeout container with your plastic fork and knife and spoon, and you put it properly in the trash can, there's nobody there to collect it. So we're just seeing a trickle-down effect from every which way you look, because we haven't planned for this sort of natural disaster or phenomenon to happen. I don't know if it's just our country, but I feel like this is something that's going to impact the rest of the world, because Americans are known for creating so much waste.
Guys.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm sorry about that. Brief pause there. Absolutely. Yeah, no, we are. That's the problem with thinking about this earlier on. This has also come to light, obviously, with the fires, with the massive fires taking place across the west of the U.S. recently. We were talking in that case about how it wasn't, and there's a deeper conversation here. I'm going to segue in and then segue back out of it. Massive fires that, yes, are burned as a result of human activity, but in some sense, there are these deep problems that we could have been working on with the fires. In some sense, we should be burning more. And actually, I'm going to come back to the plastics and specifically the issue of recycling in a second. We should have been burning more over the past couple of decades, over the past couple of centuries, largely. What we could be doing is implementing some kind of a technological solution. Trump actually got pushback, probably rightfully, because at one point, you might remember this, he was talking about how Finland would be sweeping the floors. They sort of swept their forest floors, removing litter. I believe it was Finland. They actually do that. So they actually do this. This is a practice. There are different ways to take care of forests. I think part of what this strikes at is that there are different ways to solve these deeper problems. There are different ways to deal with the environment. On the issue of recycling, which is, the question I set up for you, and you did a very good job of talking about how the dynamics of that have played out during the crisis. There are also technological solutions that we could use to deal with that. And obviously we are. That's the basis of recycling right now has to be technological. But it seems like the costs are too high, and what you would need to deal with that is more technology. It seems like in general with the crisis, with the coronavirus crisis that we're dealing with right now, whether it's reopening the economy, bringing people, who should be going to school or at least getting some education, giving them that education. Every aspect of this, if you look at it from one perspective, is a technological problem with a technological opportunity. And I think what this moment poses for us as a question is, how are we going to make that happen if we do? I think that's the only real way out if we're going to make something. If we're going to make the best out of it, it's going to be by solving those problems technologically.
Just to interrupt, I don't think this is entirely a technological problem. Well, I was just going to say, this is not entirely a technological problem. People make certain decisions based upon what they can get out of the decisions they're making. It's not like if there was a way of recycling that was dirt cheap, they would do it because they can make a profit off of it. Because there's no way to do that, they don't. So I don't entirely think, I think a lot of this is conceptual. Even from the standpoint of the way we organize our system, when we're talking about these environmental or these technological solutions, some of these solutions are going to get rid of a lot of jobs. And so what does your society have conceptually to deal with that? And we're stuck with the same thing of nothing. That's all I mean. I just think, I think a lot of this becomes conceptual. And for Manila, why do you think the environmental movement always loses these fights? Because and I don't mean that facetiously, right? I mean that, and I'm trying to be fair in the way that I say it. What is it about the way that the environmental movement frames its arguments or makes its case that the public, for whatever reason, does not seem to latch onto?
Well, I would say it's because it's inconvenient. especially when you're in fight or flight mode. And coronavirus has certainly put society in that fight or flight mode in your reptilian. You're going to look for the easiest and what you think rationally is the safest way for you to continue somewhat of your daily normal life, to keep your sanity. And people are going to continue to enjoy their takeout food. People were starting to cook at home and obviously stay at home and become domestic divas more than they had in the past because of coronavirus. But now, 6 months into it, I think people are back at this where they want to resume the life that they had in some degree. So even if it was picking up takeout and then going to the beach, the easiest thing for both the consumer and, let's say, the restaurateur is to dole out plastic. And it's just because it's easier. I think that's the short end of a long answer is it's just easier to go and use single-use plastic. It's just easier to just throw it away. And it's just easier to throw it in a big hole somewhere in this country, or if not, you ship it out to a developing nation and have them deal with the problem because it's just easier. And people are always going to revert to using or a method that they find convenient. I mean, that's it.
Manila, thank you for joining us. I think we've got to cut it here, but appreciate you being with us. Manila Chan, for everybody who's listening, is a veteran news anchor and the host, pardon me, of RT America's daily news program, In Question. You can follow Manila on Twitter at Manila Chan. That's again spelled MANILACHAN. You can also follow her on Facebook at Manila Chan Reports, and you can watch her show In Question on RT America. We'll be back in a minute with our last hour and headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from the divided states of America, it is now time for the last hour, this morning at least, of the most disruptive show in American politics. On the West Coast and in the politically independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever-vigilant, the last man on the wall with my co-host, Shane Stranahan, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together, bringing you the news each and every morning, we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, first up, the headlines. By the way, we're taking calls. You can call in about 6-7 minutes, I would say. We'll really be chatting. Usually, here's what happens, just to be blunt, to be honest, perfectly. We chat a little bit too much. We talk about headlines, and then we talk about stuff, and then we kind of get calls, and then calls take a few minutes. We're working on that because I'd like to take more calls, but we're taking calls, and I'll be a little bit stricter about it, I think. In, say, 9 minutes. 202-521-1320 is the number. In the headlines, PBS reporter Yamiche Alcindor reported the following tweet. This is actually, I'll just skip that. This is the headline. The city of Louisville has agreed to pay Breonna Taylor's family $12 million. The city also has said that it will implement reforms in its police system. Officers involved in Breonna Taylor's death have not, however, been arrested or charged. Meanwhile, in election news, during an ABC News town hall in Pennsylvania, President Trump on Tuesday claimed that he, quote, upplayed, end quote, the severity of the coronavirus pandemic. This despite telling Bob Woodward in March that he, quote, wanted to always play it down, end quote. This as Biden visited Florida for the first time since winning the candidacy, saying that Trump has, quote, done nothing but assault the dignity of Hispanic families over and over and over and over again, end quote. Yes, that's right. All 4 overs were in that sentence. He's saying that, of course, while speaking in Florida. Interesting to note, like I did already, that this is his first time visiting that state since becoming the presidential nominee for the Democratic Party. Nancy Pelosi and other members of Congress are calling for an investigation into an ICE detention center in Georgia. Specifically, a whistleblower there has blown the whistle, saying that an outside doctor, was performing unnecessary hysterectomies on many women in the facility. Again, these would be Hispanic women. This does resonate. It rhymes in some sense with Biden going after Trump for assaulting the dignity of Hispanic families, as I just said, over and over and over and over again, quote, end quote. I'm sure that'll be a theme that comes up in the debate due to happen later this month. TikTok's parent company, ByteDance, has said that it plans to retain a majority stake in the U.S. version of the app that Oracle, the tech company Oracle, will most likely be operating. President Trump has previously complimented the CEO of Oracle, Larry Ellison. He said that he seems optimistic about the deal. I'll just put it like that. But we'll see how this stuff goes. There are 3 deadlines sort of floating, one of which we've already passed in terms of when TikTok needs to hand over its U.S. operations or risk shutting down. The first, again, we've already passed this one yesterday, September 15th. The second is coming up in just a couple of days, September 20th. And then the third is early November. Here's what I mean by 3 deadlines. These are all the deadline. It's just that there have been like 2 executive orders and Trump made a comment, and it's all confused because there are these different deadlines. I'm frustrated by that, and it's symptomatic of wider problems, I would say, in this administration. But hey, it is what it is, the worldwide crisis. I don't like any of it. In our next headline, Palestinian forces exchanged fire with Israeli government forces just hours after the signing of a peace deal between Israel and the UAE and Bahrain in Washington. Trump called the peace deal, quote, the dawn of a new Middle East, end quote. The peace deal only briefly mentions Palestinians, calling for a just, comprehensive, and enduring resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. That is all that last clause there, too. Those are quotes. These are the first new agreements, by the way, in 26 years between Israel and Arab states. Last time was in 1994 with the state of Jordan. So it has been a long time. Again, I said earlier, and I'll echo myself, this is a diplomatic coup for Trump. This is definitely just in terms of pure sort of line item calculus of who's doing what or whatever, in terms of the U.S. maintaining its stance. That is what this is. It's not the U.S. asserting its supremacy. It's the U.S. maintaining its stance, I would say, internationally in the ring with China and Russia, vying not really in this case for military power, although that's the implication, really for soft power, really vying for who seems to be able to do what when it comes to negotiating difficulties in regions, which is the whole major power, minor power dynamic, I would say. Anyway, next headline here. The European Commission president has called for a Green New Deal and recovery package to recover from the pandemic, has said that vaccine nationalism, that's a quote, threatens lives, referencing individual countries' attempts to attain and distribute the vaccine outside of the guidance of a larger authority. Meanwhile, more than 3.3 million square miles of California land have burnt this year. That's more than 27 times as much as was burned last year. The Mount Wilson Observatory in the hills north of Los Angeles is now in threat from the Bobcat fire. That fire started in Azusa 10 days ago on the 6th. It is now within 500 feet of the Mount Wilson Observatory. That fire has burnt more than 40,000 acres and is currently engaging the efforts of more than 1,000 firefighters. Meanwhile, Senator Kamala Harris visited the town of Aubrey, California. That's near the burn from the Creek Fire. She spoke there alongside California emergency officials and the state's governor, Gavin Newsom. While there, she criticized, and I'm just going to quote this, she criticized the Trump administration. Here's a quote. The fact is that we are in the midst of an incredible crisis because our climate is changing in drastic form, which is leading to California burning in many places, which is leading to storms hitting our Gulf Coast repeatedly year after year and getting worse, end quote. As I just keep bringing this up, the thing is, we need more burns, not less. We talked about this with Danny Max. I don't mean to put my own pet issue into the thing, but if you look into it, it's true. Historically, there were more burns than there are now. Forest management should be burning more, just better. Arguably, there's a lot to do in terms of restoring California's firefighting institutions. Next headline. Hurricane Sally has increased in strength to a Category 2 hurricane as it hit the coast of Alabama this morning at 5:45 a.m. Eastern. According to the National Hurricane Center, it's going to cause, quote, historic and catastrophic flooding, end quote. That'll come in parts of northwest Florida and southern Alabama. Also, by the way, while we're talking about hurricanes, watch out for Hurricane Teddy, which is currently tracking near the Virgin Islands and is expected to become a major storm by the weekend. Those are headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right. Yeah. And we're taking calls. 202-521-1320 is the phone number to call if you want to call us. Yeah, man. Yeah. I forget what we disagreed about. I forget. So we were talking with Manila Chan last segment, and I was saying something and you disagreed with it and we went out, but I forget what the actual disagreement was.
Well,
I think it was,
saying,
it was about
making
whether
the
or
point
not it
that
was a technological problem.
Right. You're making the point that it's basically our issues are technological. And I was making the point that no, it's not technological. Technology is kind of neutral. It's more so a conception in regards to how human beings frame the world, what they decide are priorities and what they don't decide, and the blind spots that they have in the way they pursue those things. I think that's a thinking thing, not a doing thing, if that makes sense.
Totally. So here's my take. I'm taking the perspective that I prefer the political establishment to take. And that's what I try to do ethically, is like, if I'm going to voice some political opinion on something, it's like, okay, I'm going to say what I want my leaders to say, something as best as I can. What I want our leaders to do is to focus on brass tacks, technological improvements. How do we solve this problem in a way that doesn't create a perpetually dependent economic class of workers to get done something that could just be done with the use of technology? And then how do we do this in a way that doesn't create a rent-seeking economic class that uses this to oppress more people? So that's my take, and that's what I wish our leaders would do too. And you're saying it's a political problem, but we talk about that all the time.
No. I said it's conceptual. I said it's conceptual. I didn't say political. I said it's a conceptual problem. I said just like what you just espoused is an ideological point of view. And I'm making the point that it is an ideological point of view that stops you from getting the world that you want. That it's look, technology can be used in all sorts of ways. So they could have went back tomorrow when they were trying to do the plastic recycling, and they could have said, all right, this is expensive to do, but it is important from the standpoint of the environment, so that's going to get priority. So we're going to make this done, get this done despite the expense. They didn't do that because ideologically they're not set up to do it that way. I'm making the point that what you want, and I would probably agree with you in regards to saying, yes, these are technological issues, meaning, how do you solve this? Well, that's probably technological. But before you can even get to the point of having people in a room drafting a technological solution, you have to at the very least have people in the frame of mind to say that, yes, this is what we want to do, as opposed to something else. That's all. It's not going to say you're wrong. I'm just saying there's something underlying that goes beyond the framing, and you're acting, or it seems as you're coming across as if the technology in and of itself is the thing by itself. I'm saying it's not. It takes point of view, it takes intention, imagination, and all of those things to be brought to bear in a particular direction for that technological solution to even be espoused.
I'll put it like this. I think that if you look at the major economic changes in the foundations of society, go back to Marx, the transition from feudalism to capitalism was initiated by technological development. If you're going to have something that follows capitalism, that change is too going to be initiated by technological development. Technology really, as far as I can tell, is the lever that moves history, along with the ideas that steer it. Now, those ideas are important too, but still, I'm going to focus on the technology. That's my take. We've got calls. We've got Lou calling in from Missouri. Lou, you're on the line. What's going on?
Well, my first thing I want to speak about Louisville making the civil payout to the family of Breonna Taylor. Those payouts nationally should start coming out of police unions instead of out of taxpayer dollars, so that the people who are directly responsible, people who are most and people and entities that are most responsible for these police having virtually no accountability, not even virtually having no accountability, are held to account until they start making policy changes. And also, that's something that I would advise people in their different municipalities to start looking into, is how to start going after these police union contracts in terms of protests, because it's something, Shane, that that's one thing that you and I kind of agree on in terms of mass protest movements. I think it might have been, it was Killer Mike was recounting when he spoke, he spoke with Dick Gregory, and they were like, what should we do? Should we march? And he was like, marching? You niggas still marching? Excuse my language, but he's just like, we did that 50 years ago. You got to do something else. You have to change the state of play. So I would say, yeah, marches are, I'm not saying discontinue them, but they also need to be.
Lou, yeah, real quick. You can't, I just want to, sorry to interject. You can get right back to it, but you cannot say that on the radio. We will, Andre should have just cut that. But okay. That's an FCC thing, totally.
Okay, my apologies.
You're good.
My apologies. And outside of that, I lost my train of thought on that, but I do believe that it's something that more so needs to be a mass protest movement, if it's not coupled with a packaging or bundling or, like some type of, coalescing of policy initiatives from that mass protest movement, then you're kind of just ice skating uphill and just like shouting into the void. But there's also the issue of, well, even when we do that, they ignore them anyway. And that's honestly where we are anyway, because, stuff like what people are proposing now, like, these, renewed social contracts and stuff, this isn't anything new. I mean, the American system has been set up on a hierarchy of human value from the beginning, and has been, and has maintained military engagements from the beginning. I think someone in the chat looked it up yesterday. I think it was like, with the exception of maybe 17 years since America has been America. It's pretty clear to me, at least, what the operating system is, so to speak, for this particular game. And if we don't change the rule book, then ultimately I don't think we're really doing much. So we do have to start going after Supreme Court case laws to overturn things like Citizens United and Buckley Vallejo, so that we can actually get some foundation of equity and justice within our political institutions. Because right now, I think we all know, regardless of your affiliation, I think we all know that it's all up to the highest bidder. So, money equals speech. Corporations are people. They have all the protections of personhood, but none of the liabilities. And your one vote, like, what I would ask, if there's like a formula for like, what is a working person's one vote? What like dollar value does that hold if you compare it to that of a corporation in terms of their political voice, and what political voice they can put together and muster from having more money than God at their disposal?
Lou, thank you for the call, man. I would say votes are like gravity. It's kind of like gravity. Like, in and of itself, it's somewhat of a weak force, where it's being bled off into some other, dimension or whatever else. However, if you get a lot of it together, it can then become something that envelops it all. Meaning, yes, you as a single individual may not have this huge amount of political clout and everything else. However, you as a movement and as a group of people, can swallow it up whole, because at the end of the day, it depends upon you to even keep all of this together in the first place. The point I'm making to you is, I understand it is stacked, it is rigged. You do have all of these powers and everything else in place. The mechanisms of your government may be ossified, may be calcified, and all this other stuff, but there's the potential there. The framework is still there. When I balk and make the point that pull yourself out of the political spectrum, it's because I try to make the point that there is no political solution available in the way and the avenues to which you've been given. And it takes something a little bit more than just rah-rah whatever particular Democrat. It takes extricating from that party and making your demands very clear, what you want. They accept or they don't. But at the very least, you are able to make your demands something that you can't do as an individual right now when you're considered irrelevant. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. We're taking calls. The phone number is 202-521-1320. Again, 202-521-1320. I'm going to give out our call numbers real quick. If you guys live in the D.C. area, you can catch us on the radio there. We're on 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also on in Kansas City on 102.9 FM, 104.7 FM, and 1140 AM. We're all over the place online. You can listen to us on Spreaker, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Apple Music. You can also watch us on YouTube. Just do a quick search for Jamarl Thomas. That'll take you to his channel. Like his video, subscribe to it. You'll see his smiling face there, my still frame gray face, That's okay. We'll fix that at some point. On the other side, you can also go and do a search for Fault Lines Radio, subscribe to that channel, like it too, active chat room there. Consistently critical of the new incarnation of the show. Great to see an interesting little community that's spread it up of its own accord, growing, kind of like moss between the cracks of the brick door or the brick pathway that leads to somebody's front door. Anyway, random little images that your mind brings to light sometimes. If you want to, you can also go over to twitter.com/faultlinesradio. Right up top, we have our Periscope feed that's live every morning from 7 to 10. And we're taking calls again, 202-521-1320. All right. Great call, by the way. Lou from Missouri didn't respond to you, but I thought great call. A lot of interesting points there. I think I brought up at one point this idea of legibility. I believe this is actually the term created or at least popularized by this author, James C. Scott. He's an American political scientist and anthropologist. I guess where a lot of this stuff seems to be going, Jamarl, if I had to choose a core issue other than something like Medicare, your core issue would be looking at the Democratic Party, looking at the political party of the left, ostensibly in the U.S., seeing no representation, and sort of shouting from the streets as the town crier, we need to abandon this party. We need to do something about this. Why is nobody doing anything about it?
I love the town crier thing. Yeah, that's fair. I'll take that.
Yeah. No. Okay. Yeah. Exactly. I don't want to misrepresent, but I feel like that's pretty fair too. And here's my take. I don't know how I'm going to represent myself in this, and I don't need to. But I think that the government is failing. The political parties that are supposed to represent us are failing. And what we need, and it's hard to talk about this one, frankly, because there's so much that needs to be done. If we're going to have a functional government on the other side of this, this is my personal opinion. I think it's going to be a little bit more local. I think that as the federal government starts to dissolve, or at least get less capable over the course of years and decades, what you're going to need in order to fulfill essential functions are local, inherently decentralized bottom-up organizations. I'm not saying we should institute these as some sort of ideological thing. Sure, yeah, I'm saying that we'll need to, because if you have a larger entity that can't provide for those services, you are going to consequently get the provision of services from the bottom up. So that's thing one. But thing two is, if you get those services, what you're building is functionally something like an autonomous state within a state, a local state within a state. And over time, maybe that state just takes over. I don't know exactly what that process looks like, but I'll note that America has a unique seedbed of ideas that would support that kind of localism, decentralization, et cetera. And I think if we're going to make it happen, it's going to be technologically. I think that things like apps, ways of organizing, dealing with democracy, organizing projects on a local scale, I think that apps are going to, like grassroots apps, hopefully, open source apps, hopefully, specifically, are going to be a major plank in that. How do you organize? How do you organize politically if your political system is failing, and if you have to think things up from first principles in the 21st century with all our technology? I think that's a real question. What's your take?
I think we're going to be trapped in a web of our democratic system, and as it goes down, there's not going to be this organizing and everything else is going to be a helter-skelter ride down. Now, and what I mean by that, I don't think the government dissolves in this kind of way. I think it does everything it can to retain its integrity, meaning to stick to it, to stay within itself. And however that goes, whether that's putting somebody in office that's a brutal tyrant, or whether it's putting somebody in the lefty who tries to kind of ameliorate those things. But I don't have this idea in my head that it implodes, or that it implodes in this kind of gentle fashion. I honestly do think that whatever happens coming up in this election, it's going to be, look, either one candidate blows out the other candidate when it's perfectly clear this guy won. In which case it's like, okay, fair enough. There's no way for you can kind of cling to it. Like you can't even create the mirage of ownership of power at this point. But if that's not the case, then the question becomes, all right, is one going to give it up? And is the other going to, try to hold on to it? And I don't have an answer for that. And I got to be honest, this is like the first time in my lifetime where I don't have an answer for that question. I'm not sure anybody does. Because fact of the matter is, if Donald Trump says, no, I won this, are there going to be mechanisms with people in place to pull him out of that seat? And keep in mind, these are human beings that also have their own political ideologies, regardless of what their job is and what they've been taught. These people who are in Congress now are supposed to be doing the job of representing the interests of the country. And because of the weird way the incentives have broken down in our politics, It's unnecessary. You have two parties. One party says, I give you this. The other party says, I give you that. And you're like, well, wait a minute. What if I just want something else? Yeah, we don't offer something else. We offer this. Like, so what do you think about it? I mean, it seems like you have this thought that it collapses slowly. And I don't think it does.
Yeah, it's either that it collapses slowly or that we get invaded or something like that. Straight up, I don't see how else that works. Or there's the prospect of a violent revolution. I don't see that happening either. Frankly, I think that America, a relatively new country, but there have been a lot more violent revolutions in a lot of other countries. What could happen is something like a coup, like a relatively fast coup. But frankly, we've had assassinations in the U.S. before. We've had potentially an outright coup with JFK. Depending on your take on that situation. So there's a history of that, but that's not the same thing as a violent revolution. Yeah. And that would merely preserve, as far as I can tell, the functions of the state. That would preserve the form and the functions of the American state. So if you're going to get a reform, the only thing that I'm really betting on, because it's the only future that I want and everything else would be a hedge, the only thing I'm betting on is a peaceful sort of devolution of power and building up local institutions. And that's why that's my focus. That's why I'm damn consistent with myself. To the point where I can get boring. I think hopefully why I'm not boring is just because people aren't used to hearing this kind of thing. But yeah, that's my take. That's my focus on this stuff.
For there to be a technological solution out of it. I would love for there to be, like for example, if take it this way, do you believe that the next group of candidates, so let's say this works out, are going to be better or worse than the candidates who are up there now, and that the issues and that they're going to be talking about are going to be in the interest of the public, in as much as they are now? Like, it's not that we don't have the technology now, Shane. That's kind of the point that I keep making. That's why I say it's a conceptual thing. We could create a hyperloop that goes from California to Washington, D.C. We can do it now. We could create technology where we don't have to use airplanes to get from point A to point B. You could create a tunnel underwater that goes from here to London. You could do that stuff. We have the technological skill and capability to do it. You just don't have the point of view of saying, let's use technology for the ends of humanity. Because at the end of it, somebody says, okay, that's great. How can I make a buck out of it? Even from the standpoint of using technological innovation to ensure that the products that we need don't ultimately kill us in the end from an environmental standpoint. Meaning creating an idea of saying, all right, what's the full life of this product? Meaning at the end of this product's life, how can we recycle this in a way that's fashionable, as opposed to at the end of it saying, what are we going to do with it? Okay, let's just toss it. We can do that stuff. Look, I think the question that I have for you is, how did you get your world, your society, whether it's government or not, to look at what we're talking about here and saying, yeah, there's technological solutions for those things. Let's start employing it. How do you get your world to do that? And that's like what, a $30 billion question, you could say? Because short of getting an ideology and a point of view that says, yes, these things are important, these things are priorities, let's make sure human life is raised to the highest pinnacle that it can be, we don't get that. We get something else, despite the fact that the ability is there.
I'll put it like this. There are many roads that lead to Rome, but most roads, if you take them, they don't lead there. They lead wherever they lead. You're just going to sort of going on a random walk in a given direction. What you need is leadership on the most foundational levels. What you need is individual people with a vision, specific visions. And I know that's abstract, it's stupid, but I would say that's the starting point, because that's frankly that's the human level. That's the only level.
By the way, that's not
on
abstract and
as
stupid.
People.
That's not abstract and stupid. I mean, what do you think America is as now? Like the religious belief of whatever America is. That is.
Well, you're pushing back on me. I get what you're saying. You're pushing back on me because I'm saying leaders, and you're saying the political entity that is supposed to elevate leaders in the American system is dysfunctional. I'm saying that's stupid. Don't see leadership within the context of the American political system. See leadership as like a fundamentally noble human activity that you can engage in without needing to start a business and without needing to become either a Democrat or a Republican. What we need are leaders. We need individual people to attain power, to build up their own power bases, to create new technologies, new political organizations from the bottom up, those kinds of things. I'm saying we need people. We need a mass mobilization of the human potential of the human population. That's what I'm saying foundationally needs to happen. And that doesn't need to be a spiritual shift. It's not like I'm saying, like the hippies did, that there needs to be a transformation of consciousness. I already see it happening during the crisis. What we need are a sort of cascading effect of some people who can lead other people to lead other people. That's not a spiritual thing. I think it's going to be an inevitable result. It's just a matter of how and to what extent it happens and whether it's enough to help us weather this storm and get through stronger on the other side.
Okay. I feel you. I just don't think those things just happen per se. And I'm looking at it in the context of our current world. And it's like...
Oh, no, I'm saying I'm calling for it to happen. I'm trying to do whatever I can. I'm in my own small way, and I'm building stuff up independently. I might have cool stuff to launch at some point soon. Who knows? But I'm just advocating that everybody, to the best extent of their abilities, if you're listening to this, this is not a fire alarm. This is not an emergency drill. We need your help. We need your assistance. There's a huge opportunity right now, and I'm not kidding. We have a public platform as a radio station. And for all that the mass media is going to decry Russians for, whatever, disrupting American political, the American political system, we need to save America, straight up, like for everybody in it. And I think in a weird way, there's a rallying cry, and it's not against some outside entity. It's not against the Russians or the Chinese. It's not against global warming. Really what it's foundationally about is the decay of the system itself. You need to fix that system. That's my take. Anyway, I don't mean to be too ideological. I don't mean to be didactic. Jamarl, please take it away.
No, I can't say I entirely disagree with you. I mean, it always boils down to how. And the how is always Jack Fresco. If anybody ever listens to Fresco comes up with the Venus Project. He's like, get rid of cash, get rid of money. Those things are chains. It's like a slavery and that type of thing. We have the capacity to make this world a utopia-esque. Because quotation marks around it, there's no such thing as utopia. There's only progress, and your environment is always going to basically create your behavior. And so he would make that argument, but you always get to the point of saying, how? And he was standing there blank. He has no idea. It's like the transition is always the hard part, because in our history, the transition has always been a helter-skelter ride down. And you have $1 trillion military a year, like that, it just looks bad. But let's go to a break.
If we knew how to do it, real quick, let's go to a break. If we knew how to do it, it would be done. The point is, this is hard. There are a lot of secrets out there. One way to see this is that there are a lot of techniques or tactics that people haven't figured out yet that would fit the modern era in terms of what to do, opportunities to problem solve. That's where human ingenuity comes in, and that's why I can't give you an answer. All I can give you is the impetus. All I can try to do, and all I'm trying to do, is give people some of the motivation to see that there are ways out of this crisis. It's going to be hard, but if we do it and we start soon and with some vigor, there's a chance that we can make some progress. Anyway, like you're saying, I didn't mean to cut you off. We're going to go into a break. Probably still taking calls, 202-521-1320. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be right back.
Fault Lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
So Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field...
No, Dr. Reese.
Whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio.
iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. For now, we're taking calls, 202-521-1320, trying to bring a guest on to talk about the environment, actually. A major theme of the show, not entirely coincidental, of course, with massive wildfires in the western half of the United States. the smoke from those fires apparently now reaching the East Coast, apparently reaching, several thousand miles away plus. We're taking calls. And of course, as Hurricane Sally, it's, it's interesting. It is apocalyptic. I guess in a weird way, though, it's just what happens. I guess there's just an apocalyptic mood about. One thing here, I don't mean to make too much out of this. I'm going to bring in etymology for a second. On the word apocalypse, actually, it's a connection with the word revelations. Obviously, like historically religious words, they both kind of mean the same thing. There's like an idea of an unveiling, or like the lid being ripped off, the superficial covering that obscures some system, or some process, or something. I think that's what's happening. I think that, frankly, when you get into the times, I think it's not a mistake. When you get into times where you feel the need to use the word apocalypse, it's usually because you're in a system that's declining. It's going through a system of serious change, and either it's going to die and something else is going to come out of it, or some aspects of it are going to be preserved and something radically different is going to assume its shape in some sense. Anyway, that's what's happening. We're seeing our system break up in some parts. I don't think this is going to happen too quickly, but this is one of those like massive stress loads that's hitting our government specifically at this point. And if it doesn't break it right now, it's definitely putting some serious cracks in it. And it's moreover, it's exposing where those cracks are for anybody who's trying to break it up. That's I think in some sense what's going on right here. And with any unveiling, it's also an opportunity to see some new things. So hopefully we do. What's your take, Jamarl?
It depends on how fervently people are going to try to hold on to the system. I mean, yes, unveiling, that's fair. I would think of unveiling in a slightly different way. I mean, I don't think you're trying to hit it from a religious angle, so I don't think it's coming from that point of view. But I do think human beings, we take one action after the next, just going through history. And, one parent or one family imparts something to the next, and your civilization grows. And you learn certain things, you learn certain attributes, you get certain ways of being, and you have certain ideas of what's right, wrong, good, bad, etc., etc., etc. But from the standpoint of ways of being, those good and bads oftentimes take a back seat. So we would praise God while cutting into the flesh of an animal and devouring that flesh of that animal. That's normal, and we don't necessarily see that as being good or bad. It just is. Is that good, though? Is it okay to do that to an animal? Those aren't necessarily questions that we necessarily even engage, even though there are some people out there who scream to the hilt, it is wrong to kill that animal in order to get pleasure from your taste buds. I'm making the point that we live our life in a particular way. And even though we don't question right, wrong in those contexts many times, your reality does judge you. And it judges you in a way of saying, are you living in a way that's consistent with maintaining and preserving life on Earth? Everything else becomes secondary, right? The reality part is real. You're a human being. You're a physical being flung in space on a rock at fantastic speeds. And it takes a certain degree of things to go in order scientifically in order for you to live and survive. And the point that people are making is that is under threat. That those things are being questioned. And those things are being questioned just based on the way you live your life. And honestly, it's not even oftentimes intentional. It's just, for example, the grandmother who goes to McDonald's to get her 4-year-old a hamburger meal doesn't pay attention to the fact that that worker is not getting paid that well, doesn't pay attention to the fact that that cow is probably tortured, nor does it pay attention to the fact that she's getting her kid hooked on something that's going to be stuck with him the rest of her life because of the way his taste buds and everything else is arranged, his biology. She doesn't mean bad. I would make the point that this is your world. And whether she means bad or not, it just so happens that there are larger consequences that go along with the way people operate and engage on this planet. Shane, I think that most people don't mean bad. And I honestly believe that since the 80% of the world lives off of like less than $10 a day, climate is always going to be secondary to people who need their needs met. And sometimes the people get their needs met in ways that are not necessarily the best from the standpoint of the planet. And that's why I'm more pessimistic on this. Because I don't see how that process unravels itself without something drastic happening. And I don't know what that drastic thing would be. And it seems that fires on one end of the country, hurricanes on the other, pandemic everywhere else, doesn't seem to be enough to do so. That's grim.
No, but it's
not
over.
That's grim.
It's not over.
That's very grim.
Yeah, we have hurricanes every year. We have wildfires every year. You have bugs going around every year. Obviously, you do not have a pandemic of once in a century or such proportions as this one seems to be. You don't have that hitting every year. But there's also the possibility that these things are going to be hitting more often.
Exactly.
And then, wildfires, that issue doesn't seem to be getting any better. The issue of drought in the western half of the U.S., with water getting shipped in at some points from as far away as Canada, to southern parts of the western coast. I remember that growing up. That's been a problem for a while, and I don't see any signs of that getting better. So you're right.
But even self-harm, self-harm, meaning the technological stuff. Like when you're talking about technological innovation, man, 1,000% agree with you. And looking at the world and saying, okay, these are problems. How do we solve these? And what is the technological solution for it? Because if you could get the prices down cheaper and everything else, then you can get a product and that gets out further and wider. But again, you have to be looking at it from that context. But that also comes with the consequence of people losing jobs, like en masse. I'm not a big Yang fan, but Yang is right when he's talking about the jobs that have been bled off just from the standpoint of technological innovation. So that's a human issue, right? I mean, you could almost say that's a human nature issue in and of itself, coming in contact with a perspective that humanity is taking regarding the way it appropriates cash and uses technology to do so. I don't know. How do you process that? Like when you're looking at the world and you're thinking to yourself, look, these things have happened before. This is not necessarily apocalyptic, maybe, in the way that the term is used. And the way I kind of frame it in the sense of saying, I don't know how we deal with these things as humanity. Not that we can't, but from the perspective that we've taken over the course of the time that we've lived, it seems like we are uber resistant to looking at these things from a wider perspective. Okay, how do we find technological solutions that are in the best interest of humanity, et cetera, as opposed to how can we make a monstrous amount of profit? And it doesn't really matter if people get hurt on the bad end of that. As long as we're good, we're good. Give me something of a more hopeful point of view.
I think, so I'm going to start with the pessimistic point of view, which is that humanity has always had this problem and arguably always will.
Yeah.
So in some sense, the ecological devastation on the micro scale, you can look at Easter Island, where the small society effectively eradicated itself. It just drove itself out of existence by, taking out all the trees, cutting down all the trees. On the larger scale, you could look at the Arabian Peninsula, which used to be heavily forested and notoriously isn't now. You could look at the different parts of the world that over the course of tens of thousands of years, or in some cases just thousands of years, have been hugely impacted by not just the human migration, but also by the development of states, the development of civilizations that, again, just extracted resources from the face of the earth. So that problem isn't new. The mismanagement, the irresponsibility isn't new. The note of optimism I would sound is that the fact that it isn't new and that it's been happening also means that we have, some of us at least, have consistently survived those various crises. That's about, I could get more optimistic. You can try to sing pans to the human spirit or something like that. But it's just going to strike deaf ears, I know, when they look around the world and see the world burning, apparently at the hands of us.
No, so I think your point is we've endured threats before and we're still here, basically.
Exactly. And what we should be doing, what we should be focusing on, ostensibly, as a part of this larger symbiotic, environment, that we are literally a part of, is trying to preserve that environment literally as a sort of existential biological need. Maybe we'll see that happening. And to talk about that with us, this is an interesting segue. We have with us now for the next couple of minutes and the next 15 minutes after that, Dr. Reese Halter, award-winning broadcaster and distinguished conservation biologist and author. Upcoming book, by the way, Gen Z Emergency. Dr. Reese Halter, thank you for joining us. How are you doing this morning?
Yeah, good. Very timely conversation.
Absolutely. So I'm just going to check in first on this right off the bat. Where are you in the country right now?
Well, I'm just along the Northern California, Oregon border, and in the firestorms. We have the Slater fire not so far away from us. So air is still quite putrid, and and it's dry. It's fire season, but it's eerie, and it's just another wake up call of as you were saying earlier, mismanagement and abuse and looting and just an overall relationship with our species with the planet. I think it's really important that people understand, and I don't mean to be macabre, but if Homo sapiens sapien left, no other of the 2 million known species other than the domesticated animals would miss us. On the other hand, we are inexorably tied to everything else, and we have done a shocking job of taking without giving. And so the way we move forward here is we 110% become caretakers.
Dr. Halter, Shane made the point earlier that fires often occur in California, and we often get hurricanes. But what makes this different? I mean, it seems, dramatically different just because we're getting hit on both ends of the country in these kind of dramatic, grand scenes of these things. But what's different about this year and maybe even the previous year in regards to how these things are hitting us in this country?
Yeah, the biggest difference is the amount of energy in the system. So remember a million years ago, for some, maybe less for others in class, one of the teachers would have told, or you would have read, that matter is neither created nor destroyed, it's just transformed. So we've been living off the backs of the earth in so many different ways, but the main thing is that we've been using fossil fuels as the energy source. When we combust a hunk of coal or a gallon of gasoline, take a solid or a liquid and we transform it into a gas, the heat from the combustion of that, some 90 to 93% of it is locked in the ocean. To put it in a global perspective, every second, the amount of heat we're putting into the ocean is the equivalent of dropping 5 Hiroshima-style bombs. There's so much heat. Over the last 25 years, my colleagues have accurately, the thing that hurts today is that science is besmudged and sneered at, and spat on, and so on and so forth. But people need to understand that scientists measure things meticulously. So I don't throw these numbers lightly forth. One of the top ocean physicists in the world from China, who has noted that 2019 and 18, his group found that the oceans were the hottest that they've ever been in modern times.
Dr. Halter, let's come back to that for a moment. Let's take a quick break. We'll be back in a moment. We have Dr. Reese Halter, award-winning broadcaster, distinguished conservation biologist, and author. We'll be back in a moment. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Fault Lines. Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. And for this segment, Dr. Reese Halter, award-winning broadcaster, distinguished conservation biologist, and author. His upcoming book, by the way, is Gen Z Emergency. And just so you know, if you want to, you can follow him on Twitter, Dr. Reese. The Twitter handle there is Relentless Reese. Again, the word relentless, and then Reese is spelled R-E-E-S-E. You can also check out his website, drreese.com. Of course, Reese is spelled the same way there. Dr. Halter, thank you again for joining us. Dr. Reese, I should say, thank you again for joining us. We're talking about a bunch of stuff. You're talking about the oceans heating up. I will let you get back into that. I've got other stuff I want to ask you about, but we kind of cut you off. Please go right ahead.
Dive into it. Look, the reason everything is amped up is the heat, right? These fires and hurricanes are way more wicked. And in the case of the hurricanes, what we're seeing with Sally is moving at 2 miles an hour. OMG. Anyway, this heat is driving everything. In the West, in the world, forget the West. We're seeing higher highs. We're seeing longer heat waves. We're seeing longer dries. The Congolese is on fire. The Siberian taiga is on fire. The Amazon is on fire. The Arctic peat is on fire. The West is on fire. Australia just came off its most intense continental climate fire in modern times. This is we're playing for all the marbles here, and anyone who thinks that this is just a piece of fluff, they need to really give their head a shake, because on top of all the fires and on top of all the bedlam, which I could go on for a long time, we have crossed an ecological planetary threshold. We are losing billions upon billions of animals, and we can't exist without the animals. They are our planetary partners.
You're talking about the United Nations report. Basically, the report that there was another report that came out Tuesday. A sweeping United Nations report issued on Tuesday, the Governments Act. Basically, it's looking over what the governments have been doing and found it lacking. And the report that came out before on biodiversity, I think that is a report you're mentioning where you're talking about where they found billions of lives being wiped out.
Yeah, WWFs. But, I'm just in general. I mean, to say we've lost 68% of the animals is not the full picture. The full picture is that we've lost 70% of the seabirds. We've lost in some cases 90% of some species of sharks. The sharks have survived the last four mass extinctions. We're out of control. The oceans are being pillaged 24/7, 365, like never before. I asked Daniel Pauly, an eminent fisheries biologist, how bad it was, not in volume, because we can give 80, 90 million metric tons plus bycatch, another 20 million tons, and about 2 people on planet Earth will know what that volume looks like. I asked him how many animals are we pulling out of the ocean every year. He said, on a rough guess, between 10 trillion and 100 trillion a year. At this rate, sometime in the 4th decade, according to Boris Worm at Dalhousie University and about 18 others, there's going to be no life left in the ocean. And by the way, scientists are very conservative, so when they make a prediction, you can probably assume that it's going to happen a hell of a lot sooner. We're out of control, and so there are many ways that we can attack this. One is refuse to be a sociopathic consumer. Guess what? If you're depressed and to go to buy something online, that's not going to make you happy. It's going to make you in debt. If you're upset, go for a walk, hang out by trees. Guess what? When you breathe underneath trees, big trees, you're actually taking in some of the most powerful medicines on planet Earth that are given off by their leaves and bark. And those volatile organic compounds called phytoncides, collectively, they boost the human body. They boost our cells. They lower our stress, our cortisol, and they help fend off all kinds of diseases, including cancers, right? So make walking part of your day. Refuse plastics. There are infinite number of plastics in our oceans, and they've come from the land. So we refuse that. And I think the thing that each of us can do right this very second to fight the climate crisis is switch your diet. Switch to a plant plant-based diet. Become a vegan. It's not an all or nothing. I'm not saying go tomorrow and lose your most favorite whatever it is that has to do with animals, but dial it back. It can be done. The veganism is on the rise, and it's something that each of us can do, because your burgers are coming from the forest. We're swapping beautiful Amazon forests for hamburgers, and that is not acceptable, right?
Dr. Reese, thank you for being with us, man. So much we could talk about here. Right at the end there, that's the part that I started to disagree with you. But it's a conversation, and we didn't even get into it, so we might not actually. But we can have you back on, talk about that for at least a segment, specifically on the thing with meat. I have been both a vegan and a carnivore. I've literally sat at the polar extremes in the past, not now, for ethical reasons, including environmental reasons. So there's like a conversation there, and I know that sounds crazy, especially if you're a plant-based eater, if you're a vegan eater. That sounds insane. Maybe we can talk about that some other time, possibly with grass-fed beef and stuff like that. I'm actually curious though. We earlier in the show, I brought up this idea. While we have you, I just want to check in with you. You're a conservation biologist. We're talking about this idea of restoring large areas of the earth that have been bought up under private ownership, trying to restore the ecologies of those ecosystems. Specifically, there's this great bison belt that has been wiped out. That before specifically European colonization, before the arrival of European immigrants, before the wiping out of indigenous peoples, but even before the arrival of humans to the North American and American continents itself, even before that event happened, there were these different ecosystems in place that were sort of held together by these larger herbivores, these megafauna, and those have been wiped out. Now, there's a project that I brought up called the American Prairie Preserve. You very well could know about, probably do. I'm kind of excited about that, found out about that pretty recently. I'm just curious, what's your take on that tactic? What's your take on that approach of trying to solve these problems by restoring large swaths?
Our take is that's the only way we're going to make it. Ed Wilson has put forward, excuse me, E.O. Wilson has been talking for decades on half Earth and setting aside half the Earth. He's written a terrific book some years ago now called Half Earth. And the way we do this is to set 50% of the land aside. And in my opinion, I get in trouble, but who cares? Fisheries, it has to end. What we have done, and what we are doing to the oceans is ruinous, and then some. So we've got to set all these ecosystems aside and allow them to begin to repair. We reintroduce certain animals. Wolves come to mind, but not just wolves. And the hierarchy in these systems has a chance to rebound, and including the soils, right? The skin of the earth is very vital. We're pushing in a couple billion pounds each year of these nerve poisons, and that's got to end yesterday because it's contaminating everything and it's killing the soils.
Dr. Halter, I'm curious, why? I agree with you. Meaning, you look out at your planet, and the planet seems to be under stress, clearly. I mean, if anybody makes the argument that they believe in science, or basically scientific research, they would come to the same conclusion. Why does the environmental movement continue to lose on this front? Meaning, if reality is in and of itself your reasoning and your rationale saying, look, this is your world, this world is collapsing, why does that not win as a political argument? Why can't you guys get it over the finish line?
I think the biggest problem today, the most overt problem, is corruption. And I think we have these special interest groups in D.C. and elsewhere that are driving this thing. They're driving the politicians that are acting on behalf of these mega corporations that have no interest in communities. So if we're going to do this and we're really going to survive, we got to dial back to our communities, our counties, and we really have to become not only caretakers but self-sufficient. We can grow stuff, right? Food is the medicine, and we can grow this stuff, and we can employ people in meaningful jobs. But there's no sense in everybody working.
Wait, Dr. Reese, I want to pause you for a second, and I could not agree with you more on one of these key issues, but I kind of want to push back, literally just to draw out your response and get some of your thinking in the process.
Okay.
You said that we should dial it back to local counties. I couldn't agree more, but I just want to hear you say it. Why is that? Why do you think, again, if this is not just a nationwide but a global situation with ecological catastrophe, an incipient mass extinction event, et cetera, why do you think that it's important that we act first and foremost locally?
Well, first of all, we've got to take care of everything around us, and this notion of going to the web to buy anything and having it delivered yesterday is nonsense. The footprint is terrible. We're getting stuff from the other side of the world where literally people are being paid several grains of rice a day, slave labor. That's not cool. That's why we have laws. We need to become self-sufficient. At the end of the day, the way we do this is with citizen well-being. When we measure that in our towns, our counties, and our cities, we win. When we are addicted to this GDP notion of more and consuming forever on a finite planet, that is the end. And the way we can do this is to take care of our people and lessen their work hours and make their work hours more meaningful and healthy. We don't need all this cancer. We don't need all this sickness. It's from the chemicals all that are bathing us. And they're made by these heinous corporations. We don't need nerve poisons, for heaven's sakes. We've got medicines from mushrooms that we can put in a solution, pour on the fields, and it doesn't kill the insects. It strengthens the plants so that the insects don't want to attack and can't attack the plants. That's how we move forward, with nature, not against nature. We know this. This isn't hypothetical. It's time. We've got the playbook. It's time to roll this stuff forth.
A lot to talk about here. Dr. Reese-Halter, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, for those listening, that was Dr. Reese-Halter, award-winning broadcaster, distinguished conservation biologist, and author. His upcoming book, by the way, is Gen Z Emergency. If you want to check him out on Twitter, you can, at Relentless Reese. Also, check out his website, drreese.com. We will be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening. Thanks also to engineer Andre. Thanks to producer Raheem. Again, we'll be back. Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
All right, guys, I want to thank all of you for joining us. You will likely be seeing me a little bit later today. That was Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. I agree with the premise, right? It's not so much that. Let me say it this way: if you get people in the country and you ask them what are their priorities, oftentimes climate is lower on the priority list. If you're talking to people and you eliminate a certain section and you talk about a class of people and you say, hey, people who are in the upper class, how much do you care about climate? Well, they care a little bit more. Their individual needs are met. Because their individual needs are met, they can care about other things, meaning their point of view can become wider when you don't have to focus on entirely how am I going to get point A to B? How am I going to pay for this kid? How am I going to pay, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's not that the climate issue is not real. Of course the climate issue is real. It's more of a question of if you are sitting and trying to figure out how to do something, how do you get that done? And for better or for worse, that can't be done in a direct way. Meaning you can't get in office on climate. You can get in office on dealing with other people's material needs. And those people, as you deal with their material needs, would allow you to attend to your issue of climate. It's not that they don't care about it. It's that they have other things that they care about more. So having a conversation where the argument is made of like, people shouldn't do this or people shouldn't do that. That's your opinion. There's no God saying one or the other. And even though I may agree with you on this kind of principle standpoint, that principle standpoint is not the end all be all. And we're not in a reality that gives us the easy out of not being able to do X or Y. I mean, for fuck's sake, we put people in cages for smoking pot. I think that is abominable. And yet, it takes place. I'm saying there's all sorts of things I disagree with that takes place on this planet. And right, wrong becomes somewhat difficult. Cause and effect is a little bit easier. Meaning, if you're doing something that's destroying your world, then, well, hey, you're doing something that's destroying your world. The consequence is the end of your life for doing XYZ over a period of time. But the right and wrong stuff and the way that we deal with it in humanity's sake, especially when we talk about issues like this, become a little bit more difficult to pull off. All right, I'm going to end this here. I'm going to say like, share, and subscribe. I apologize, you guys haven't been seeing me all that often as much as normal. I have many doctor's visits, let's call it that I have to attend to. All right, I want to say like, share, and subscribe. Thanks all.